is going to sort of limit our policy options. So I guess that's the big mistake. Then whether you get the um, whether you reduce your reliance on Russia by fracking or LNG terminals
All of
or
the
imports
Ben,
from another country.
all of the above.
Sure, exactly. Yeah, sure. That's exactly what I'm saying. That would have been a good idea. But I think the key idea, and that's a key thing in economics in general, is you want to diversify, right? It's the same as when when you invest in the stock market, you don't want to just like buy one stock because that's going to be hugely volatile. Instead, you want to hold an entire portfolio. So here it's the same thing. You want to diversify your gas imports, and you want to do a little bit of fracking. You want to get some gas from Norway. You want to get some gas from Qatar, I guess, and you want to get some gas from all these different countries. And so that if one of those countries becomes a problem, either or one of these supplies becomes a problem, either for environmental reasons or because there's a crazy dictator in charge that starts a war, you can just cut
Who's
out
in
that part
charge
of
of
your.
who's in charge of Qatar, Ben?
Yeah, but the point is exactly. So the point is, it's okay if you're. So I mean, it's obviously morally wrong, in a sense, to get your imports from sort of bad guys in quotation marks. But the point is, in a sense, like if you're diversified and you only have say 5% of your gas imports from Qatar, then if the bad guys go too bad, you can reduce. You can just cut out that part and reduce your gas consumption by 5%, or substitute those 5% easily with gas imports from somewhere else, right? But the problem is getting 55% of your gas imports from a bad guy. Then that limits your options how to respond to the bad guy. So that to me is the issue. Obviously, let me say a bit more differently. I think you want to also distinguish a little bit between the long run and the short run. So obviously, in the long run, you don't want to be relying on any bad guys whatsoever. But like in the short run, if you think about going forward, then I think the thing to do is just again to diversify and to sort of not be too reliant on any one bad guy. It seems like it's just not possible to get enough gas without importing from some bad guys, so including Qatar, if you want to call it that. But at least then you want to be diversified. Is I think my view.
But Ben, I gave you because you were absolutely right. We have to change consumption. You said reduce consumption. There, I disagree, because I think we should continue to work hard, keep our economy growing. It doesn't matter whether it costs a little bit more, because a little bit more, in the scheme of things, is a good investment. Whether we heat our houses now in Germany with what seems to be an inefficient conduit mechanism to generate heat yet again from electricity transported through transmission grids and distribution networks does not really matter, because we are already allowing that we have an inefficiency level of only 7% of taxed money arriving at whatever task it is designated for. So that's not a problem, because we had 14% of this in 1982. So that's fine, that's okay. But having said this, the inefficiency of socialist governments in Europe is not our topic for today. The problem is the strategic decision to not take the action now in a war economy situation, not recognizing that we are at war. That is the strategic mistake. This is what needs to change. As an economist, I think you should advocate quite heavily for making the right decisions, because it's more economic in the long term having a brand left. Specifically for the Germans, their Made in Germany brand is currently being deteriorated, denigrated, absolutely dissolved. Nobody trusts the Germans anymore. Even the Poles, who know that their tanks sourced from South Korea are too slim, too thirsty, not hard enough, not tough enough, but at least they can get it from there. They are sourcing those tanks, and this is a very minuscule part, sourcing it from South Korea, as opposed to a Leopard 2s. That's a bad sign. Just imagine what the consumers, who wield more power than anybody else, will say about Made in Germany. Olaf Scholz is killing Germany and sacrificing Germany's brand name, which has been rebuilt out of the ashes of the Holocaust and the Second World War, on green and communist, social democratic prejudice. Don't you think that as an economist you should speak out against genocide and help the Germans understand what they actually need to do to save themselves and their future?
I mean, look, first of all, I obviously agree that that we should not pay a single more euro to Putin, and we should help stop these atrocities. Second, I also think it's a huge problem, the loss of German esteem in particular in our Eastern European neighboring countries. I think as you say, it's going to damage Germany's reputation in the long run. And third, I mean, look, like we have been doing exactly this. Like we have been since March saying that we should stop importing oil and gas and coal, all of them, from Russia, and stop sending any more money to Russia. What we're doing now, again, is, I guess, the politicians, I'm unfortunately going to just a little bit repeat myself. The politicians have decided they don't want to do that. I mean, at some point, what am I going to do, right? Like, I can just keep saying we need to do an embargo, but it's not going to happen. So what we're trying to do now is just to reduce gas consumption in the smartest possible way, in the fastest possible way. And those are all the things that we've discussed. Fortunately it's happening, and hopefully maybe in like 3 months, either Putin is just gonna turn off gas supplies by itself, and Germany's gonna be just fine going through the winter, or maybe even miraculously, maybe if we're in November, all the gas storages are 100% filled, gas demand has fallen a lot, maybe actually the German politicians will change their mind and will say, okay, we're going to just cut those remaining 20% of gas imports from Russia. Obviously, the oil embargo is coming as well. So, that I think is the realistic way of approaching it. I personally would like much more. I would like, to cut gas imports from Russia immediately. I would have liked to cut them basically on the 25th of February. But again, like the politicians unfortunately have made this decision. So what are you going to do?
Finance. I understand, Ben, you have a hard out in 5 minutes, right? Finance, go ahead.
All right, 5 minutes. Thank you for coming, Ben. I will say that the empirical evidence is in supporting financial ties and integration with horrific dictatorships does not bring human rights. It empowers them. We have not seen any human rights gains. I think it's very safe to say that the empirical evidence shows that there have been no human rights gains in Russia or China since we have integrated with them, which was the thesis in the 70s and 80s. That has been proven to be massively false. We agreed?
Yes, I agree with that.
Right. Now, the only way to replace the oil we get from the oil, gas, and petrol products we get from Russia and the cheapo industrial products we get from China, the best way to not integrate with them would be to actually produce all that stuff as much as possible outside of there. We got to get our energy from somewhere. So magic isn't going to do it. I understand that if that means we're going to have to work with some other dictators, it is what it is. But at that point, why the waffling on fracking or any other way to up domestic energy production when, yes, I agree, there are environmental costs. I'm all for saying, hey, let's force oil companies that do it to pay for those environmental costs. I'm there with you. But I'd say that producing that domestically certainly has to have lower costs, both environmentally and in human rights, than what the hell we're seeing out of Russia and to a lesser extent China right now. Am I missing something?
No, I think that's right. Mostly, again, like, okay. So I think I agree with sort of 80% of what you said, or maybe even 90%. Again, two things. So I think, again, we need to distinguish between the long run and the short run. So I guess in the long run, I think the goal should be indeed to just get your energy imports or trade integration only from sort of good guy countries if you want, or you know.
You're going to need to produce more, right? The only way you're going to reduce from there is you have to produce more from somewhere else. Energy, right? Like whether it's gas or it's solar or it's nuclear or it's like we have to produce the energy, not from a bad guy, right?
Well, I mean,
want to not use bad guys.
So that's partly right, but what you're missing is that you can also just use less of that energy, right? So gas, for example, again, I mean, I think the world will keep going, and Germany will just consume 25% less gas for the next few years. So, I know and I guess in the end, we want to get away from fossil fuels anyway and go towards green energy. So, which I guess a lot of that will be domestically produced, so wind and solar, I guess. So I think in the long run, hopefully that's going to be the solution. But yeah, I think in the short run, I think you're right that you can only reduce demand by that much. But I take it back. If you look at the last few months since the start of the war, you saw people reducing gas demand a lot more than a lot of people thought were possible. And so, I think if you do that, and together with diversifying a bit, I think in the short run, things are going to be okay. Again, like the key thing to me is that in the short run, I think, in particular in the short run, where maybe you cannot. So, starting fracking will take some time, right? For example, I mean, just to give that as an example, or expanding solar and wind is going to take some time. So in the short run, where you cannot do that yet, I think it has to be acceptable to buy energy if you really need to, and you cannot save it from these sort of bad guy countries. But then the key thing is to not buy too much, so that if they start a war, you can just cut them out and impose sanctions on them, and not repeat the mistake we've been in this time, where we're so reliant that this really hampers our ability to push back. Basically, I think that's I wish the world were easier, but I think to me that's the realistic way of approaching this.
Thank you, Ben.
And actually, can I ask a follow-up question? It came from a listener, and it frames what I wanted to ask even better.
Okay.
A veteran listener, who's a military veteran from a European armed forces, asks, oh man, this is great. Do you think future arms purchasers will shy away from German products because the German government might stop supply of parts in a future war? Or will they keep going, even knowing that the German government continues to supply all of the key machine parts that the Russian war machine works on?
So I acoustically didn't hear the first part. Do I think that arms purchasers, was that?
Should Western arms purchasers shy away from German products because the Germans supply all the key machine tools and armaments of the Russian war machine? Is the short version of the question.
Right. It's a good question. I mean, should they do that? I don't know. But yeah, I could see that. I think that's probably going to happen to a certain extent, or without having thought about it very much. Yeah.
Should the United States sanction Siemens tomorrow morning?
Right. Well,
yes or no? Should they sanction Siemens for supplying the Russian war machine and its industrial complex up until this morning with remote-controlled additional services for the CNC machines, like Heidemann does? And should they cut every single procurement for Siemens for the next 20 years if Siemens fails to do so within 24 hours? Yes or no?
I mean, I think they should put. I mean, I wouldn't quite say it as drastically, but there should be no more imports, no more exports from Siemens to Russia, and and there's.
We're both German.
The United States should put whatever
we're both
pressure.
German, right? We're
What?
both German. We're both German of descent, right? Okay, so we both understand how Germans work, right? Unless you actually tell them this way or that way, what happens?
Right. No. I was just going to say, like,
so you have to put have to put it clearly to them.
So I agree. Like whatever is the necessary pressure to prevent these exports that you described from happening. That seems like the appropriate reaction. And if, I mean, I would have thought that, hopefully maybe that you don't need to actually sanction Siemens and just, put some more diplomatic pressure on the German government and I guess on Siemens to stop this from happening. But yeah, I would agree with you. If those things don't work, I guess maybe that would be an appropriate option. I don't think that's going to happen. Just because of U.S.-German relationships being what they are.
No. It's because Ron Klain in the White House is a very weak chief of staff. We understand this. Finance. Would you please highlight what Heidemann and Siemens and other people are doing?
Genocide. In short and long, the Russian assembly lines run on Siemens and Heidenhaus, machine tools and parts that they are completely reliant on technological import. You see it in their media as well. It's not something that is hidden or only from Western sources. But new computerized manufacturing parts require regular updates, and they require both updates to the software, and they require regular. You have to calibrate them regularly. So you actually have to update them either with USB or wireless. And while they are not selling new ones, well, they weren't. It seems they now may be via third parties, especially in Turkey. While they weren't selling new ones, they might be now. They were still servicing all of the old stuff in the thing, when in fact they could go the opposite route of trashing all of it, but they're not, right? And
okay. Can I ask a question about this just to understand? So, is that weren't there supposed to be sanctions to prevent this? And does that not fall under current EU sanctions? And or if it does, how do they get around that?
So they get around it by having the local affiliate or whatever you call it still providing computer services, and they say it's not an EU company. They use one cutout usually, and sometimes they don't even. They just have their technicians doing it directly. Look, we see a Czechoslovakian company rebuilding Belarusian railways because Belarus isn't technically sanctioned, even though the Russian military machine is using Belarusian railways to move their rockets that they're firing at Ukraine. Like Turkish cutouts to break. The Turkish are how they're getting new products in. But as far as servicing the old products, they never left. They just kept going, and nobody in Germany felt the need to stop them. And because they're for-profit companies, they know that any sort of sabotage of the Russian war machine would permanently lose them Russian business, likely forever, for obvious reasons. So there's absolutely no way they're going to do it unless somebody puts a gun to their head, or and threatens them with jail time, and or threatens them with losing so much other business, say all their American business, that they would actually have to do it.
All right.
No, they've been doing it the whole way. We know they have the machines. There's pictures of the machines. They put them online themselves, like their industrialists have. We see the machines across their key and critical infrastructure.
I was aware of that. I guess I had just been under the impression that those had been all sold, in previous years. And,
but just because they're sold, they're
yes, they were.
Service. Yeah. The service is still going on.
I wasn't aware of the servicing issue. But so then I would agree with your guys' point and the listeners' point that if that's how it is, there should be, to me in a sense that's kind of getting around the sanctions, or at least getting around the spirit of the sanctions, which is to stop supplying these kind of things to Russia. So if that's the case, then I guess there should be some way of countries like the U.S. should put in place sanctions to push against that.
It's interesting, finance. It always falls back to the United States of America, the shining light, the shining city on the hill, to do the things which are right. Because somehow,
no, I mean, I think that's right. Well, exactly. I wouldn't want to rely on the Scholz government to do this.
Ben, when we have our friend Michal is a very decent young Polish economist who works at the same center as a very decent professor at Yale, who just recently published a study, and he was with us, Dom, a week and a half ago?
Something like that, yeah.
Yeah, and Michal has been chatting with us over the past week, and when Michal comes back, and we are discussing exactly this matter of how to help Europeans understand how the sanctions are currently being manipulated by specifically French, German, and Italian companies, we'd be absolutely superbly happy to have you back, because it's absolutely vital that economists, specifically those who have a voice in Germany, speak out against this. I know it's hard to talk about Siemens when you're German. It's hard for all of us, but we have to.
No. I mean, look, like I've been on a since February and on sort of basic. I mean, I wouldn't call it warfare, but like pushing very strongly against the German industrial complex, which have particularly been lobbying very, very hard against the energy sanctions, which is something we'd been pushing. And this was just like pure lobbyism to a large extent, just to protect their profits. And we've been pushing very hard against that. So yeah, I don't have an issue with this at all. I mean, and we've been calling them out quite strongly for their lobbyism. Unfortunately, they managed to sow enough uncertainty in the minds of the politicians. I guess there's this famous interview of the BASF, the chemicals company chief executive, where he says that if you implement the energy sanctions, this would be the worst economic crisis since the Second World War and the meltdown of the entire German economy. And they managed to get the ear of the politicians. So they basically, that's why, I mean, a large reason why they shied away from the energy sanctions. So we've been pushing very hard, basically saying this is total bullshit. But you can only do so much. You can only keep repeating that, and unfortunately, partly.
But Ben, is it fair to say that BASF needs the natural gas for its plastics production, and what he was doing is protecting exactly that against the completely, utterly crisis-unsuitable, stupid European regulation which has preferred customers for gas being residential customers, which is why I said 20 minutes ago, residential customers should, for the next harsh winter, get a free radiator, because then they can get across it whilst we help Ukraine win that war and sort out the energy issue. It's war economy, it's wartime. It's not about perfection, that the electricity-fueled radiators are the perfect setup, not at all. But they help us win the war, defend freedom, prevent genocide, and then we can sort out the rest. And BASF obviously has a motive to protect what is the most important integrated plastics industry in Europe, if not in the West.
But no. But like the whole point is that industry are able and have been able to substitute away from gas quite heavily. And exactly like in the beginning of the war, they were always telling this narrative. The German word was always cascaden effect or cascading effects, that exactly like if we don't import gas anymore, we cannot produce glass, right? Gas is very heavily used in glass production. If we don't produce glass, we cannot produce bottles. If we don't produce bottles, we cannot produce medicine, and then people in hospitals are going to die. Or the other version of the story is, coming back to your plastics example, if we don't import gas anymore, we cannot produce plastics, and then if we cannot produce plastics, we cannot produce food packaging, and then there's not going to be any food in the supermarkets in the cities anymore, and then people are going to starve. Right? That was literally the story that the industry lobby has been telling.
I understand, but it's a bit harsh, and you and I know that it's not completely true. My point is more that the preferred customer setup is just absolutely wrong.
No. I disagree with that. I think the key thing that's the issue is not so much that the households are preferred or protected customers. The issue is that the prices aren't passed through to the customers. It's fine if the households are the preferred customers, as long as they see the higher prices early enough. If they see the higher prices,
good point. Ben, you just got it. How does the preferred customer definition actually prevent that from happening? The preferred customer is the one who is protected from what? Significant unreasonable price changes.
No, but that's not true. That's not no. That's not true at all. There are clauses in the German law, right? In particular, it's this NSIG 24, and I guess not.
I agree.
So the politicians, if they choose to, they can pass through the higher prices to the household customers. They just don't want to do it because they're afraid of households being upset. Yeah, but like this has nothing to do with. So the problem is not the EU regulation, right? The problem is the German politicians, being afraid of passing through the higher prices to the households.
Is it?
Which
I understand this, but Ben, let me just. The regulation is only as good as the politicians who execute it.
Okay, but let me just say one more thing on this. The key thing there that you need to do, and I guess, and why they haven't increased the prices is because there are some households for whom, like, if the gas prices rise by a factor of 5 or 10, and their gas bill is suddenly like 3,000 euros per year, that's terrible. They just cannot afford it. So I think the politicians are kind of rightly worried about passing through the higher prices. But the mistake is what they need to do at the same time is they just need to compensate in particular the socially weaker households, the poorer households.
Very good point. Perfect point, Ben. I'm with you all the way on this one. They need to speak up and communicate. Those who are precarious need to be protected because that is how we work. But those who can actually deal with this higher price or with this temporary inefficiency, whether it's 1 year or 2 years, doesn't matter, those have to deal with it. Whether it's inconvenient, you have to install this. That's fine.
But the key is you want this to work through prices. You don't want this to work through rationing. You don't want this to work through some EU regulation that says this guy is going to get the gas and this guy isn't, or like through the Bundesnetzagentur, the German network agency, saying like this company is going to get the gas and this company not. Like you want the prices to increase and that to reduce demand, and that's been happening, and I think that's going in the right direction. And you just don't want to. You want to remove the friction in that process. You want the prices to be passed through to the customers, but then you want to be careful about compensating the economically weak ones. Anyway,
Ben, I know that you have very little time left, but we have 2 questions from Americans, from Dryfly and from Finance. Can you tolerate those?
Sure. Yeah, I have a hard stop in like 10 minutes, but that's okay.
Superb. Excellent. Thank you. Dryfly, shoot.
Hi, I was going to ask you a question that would take more than that. So what I'd like to do is that it's related to the actual numbers of how bad your shortage projections are. If I write it up as a flow sheet and send it to Axel, would you take a look at it and give us some kind of an answer back? And just so that you know, my background was that I spent the last 30 years as an entrepreneur selling into all kinds of industries as a mechanical components guy. But prior to that, I was a chemical engineer. And I did mass and energy balances like crazy. And I could sit down and put the question to you in such a way that between you and some of your friends, you might be able to put numbers to it and let us know whether there's a really serious problem or not a problem. And I can do it fairly simply. Would that be okay?
Okay with me.
I will.
Send it to Domin, and to me, we'll pass it on to Ben.
Yeah, because I'll do it
Sounds
I'll
good.
probably do it by hand as a flow chart, so you guys can
Easy.
kind of look at it. Yeah, make it simple, keep it short, and then I'd love to hear the numbers because that will take away some of the generalities.
Okay.
Engineers.
I have only. Can I say one quick thing? By the way, I live in an old house in a very cold part of the United States. I live on a state that borders a Canadian border. It's generally colder than Germany. I use electric heat all the time, and what I do is set my thermostat for my gas furnace low, and then only heat where I'm at. And my energy bill is much lower than if I tried to heat the whole house with gas. So this whole conundrum, it's a canard to say that base heaters don't work. What they do great is put the heat where you need it right now, and then you turn it off. And I will listen.
Fine.
Bye-bye.
But that, so I agree with that. So that's a nice point. But that is a reduction in your energy use, right? Like relative to if you heat it with gas equally everywhere. Right?
Yeah,
That's
but the
that's
key,
exactly what we've been saying must happen.
Yeah.
Is that, I mean, I think that's actually a very nice solution that, you turn down your thermostat by 2 degrees, which is like where the large savings are going to come from. But then you take your portable electric heater with you wherever you are. Yeah.
We turn it down by 10 degrees. Our house typically, our house typically runs somewhere around 15 degrees C most places. Okay. I have a wood stove in a living room, and then I have a space heater, and we actually find it more comfortable because you're up moving around. You feel fine. When you sit down, you're cold. But it's only in 1 or 2 places. Perfect.
Yeah, no, that's great. But look, just to understand where I was coming from is what you have been seeing in Germany is like a huge run by households on electric heaters, and it looks like not like people just like buying a small electric heater here or there to keep warm wherever they're sitting. It looks more like people are thinking they can replace their entire heating demand with these electric heaters. And then what I'm saying is that doesn't work. And
I don't know what the energy trade-off is between an efficient heat pump and a gas furnace. I think it depends on the efficiencies, and the efficiencies over time. You would have to get an engineer who works in that space. I don't, but I would challenge that number. I would challenge that assertion unless they give you actual numbers of both, and I will listen.
Right.
Last question from finance.
Yeah.
Oh, I had a German specific question. Can I ask Ben Moll what production lines he would close immediately to turn down gas consumption and go back with prices from Russian gas?
Right. No. I think you don't want anyone, certainly not me, but also not the head of the German network agency. Is a very good gentleman called Klaus Müller and his team, to decide who should be shut down or not. Instead, again, what you want prices to do their work. If we know, economics, if you want, is the study of how to allocate scarce resources. Gas has just been become an extremely scarce resource. We know that the most efficient way to allocate a scarce resource is through prices. Why? Because then the people, or in particular firms in this case, who need the gas the most, where it's the most valuable, will get it, because those are going to be the ones that are going to be willing to pay the highest price. So that's exactly why I've been saying, and all my economist friends have been saying, we need the prices to go up, and that's going to take care of reducing gas, and then we don't have to go into that rationing, which is exactly what we want to avoid. Once you have rationing and the politicians and so on decide who gets the gas and not, that's going to be a mess. That's going to be, I think, where you could potentially actually get large economic costs, because that's going to be then the companies are going to start lobbying, I need the gas, not that other company, and so on. and then the politically connected firms and so on are going to get the gas. So that's the scenario you want to avoid. So you just want prices to work. I don't know if that answered your question. I'm deliberately sidestepping it.
So
Thank you.
Ben, if
Finance.
we're talking about energy policy, it is very clear. We have lots of evidence here in the States for both how good and bad policy matters every bit as much as pricing. And don't get me wrong, this is a finance account. I'm clearly in favor of markets in general, but government policies matter a lot. Please look at what goes on in Texas here, if you're familiar with the energy crisis down there that was solved last winter, or the issues out in California, whether it was Enron or now, with how the structure of industrial energy policy makes a huge difference for the grid, how things work, and that matters every bit as much and controls and feeds into the pricing itself. One of the key features that I learned in Econ 1, a class which I randomly took 3 times in both high school, undergrad, and grad school, was, look, government policy can affect markets for good or bad. And in energy policy, it matters a metric ton how they do it. So just saying pricing will take care of it is, I hate to break it to you, a pretty huge cop-out. We're discussing a shortage, which, look, if you allocate it poorly, could shut down a major industry, or you see people who, or you're not forcing or helping people substitute who could, and there's human costs of people who can't afford, right, an extra $100 for winter, who you could be assisting as well.
No, so
you could be doing.
Let me jump in. So I already said some of this. You want the markets to work, you want the prices to increase, but then again, at the same time, you want a built-in mechanism for compensating people who are going to be too hard hit. And we've been making concrete suggestions for this. If you look at our paper, there's like a text box for doing this. There's other suggestions being floated. When it comes to the companies, I mean, the companies are not people. There's, of course, people working at the companies, and you want to, obviously protect those, but we have a social insurance system, a social safety net for doing that, unemployment insurance and so on, and furlough schemes. But the way you're going to get the smallest economic damage when it comes to companies, I'm 100% convinced by, is to let prices do their work. And yeah, what's going to happen, for example, right, is in Germany, there's some companies that produce fertilizer. And the way this works is you use gas to produce ammonia, and then you use ammonia to produce fertilizer. And so, yeah, if gas prices, the way they've been increasing, this is already happening, and the way they're going to keep increasing is this is going to, mean that the German fertilizer industry is probably not going to be viable anymore in the long run, or at least for some time. But that doesn't mean that's economic Armageddon for Germany, right? Because you can just import that ammonia or that fertilizer from elsewhere, and that's exactly what we've been seeing happening. So, for example, BASF, which does produce fertilizer, they have a plant in the U.S. In the U.S., gas is cheap, so they import import ammonia from their U.S. or Canadian plant, and then use that to produce the fertilizer in Germany. That's obviously terrible for the people who work in the ammonia producing businesses in Germany. But you can socially protect those people, and hopefully they'll be able to find another job. But it's not going to mean that, it's going to be the largest economic crisis of all times, which has been the sort of industry lobbyist line. That's kind of the point. So you want to...
Agreed on that, right? But have you measured this versus actual change? Have you measured cash payments versus change in industrial policy, such as what Axel suggested earlier, handing out electric heaters to people, which would reduce gas consumption and possibly save what gas there is for industrial usage, so you don't have long-term damage to industry and jobs, where we assume that new sources will come online in a handful of years? So if the industry is dead, it's dead, but you can keep it alive, and then you have more heavy industry in your nation, correct?
Yeah.
Your long term and your short term are at odds here.
Right. I mean, again, so we think that the economic costs are not going to be so large. Again, I mean, we did this estimate in the beginning of the war, and we sort of updated those numbers, and we think they're still going to be the same if Putin switches off gas. We think 1 to 3% GDP loss relative to the gas not being switched off, which is sizable, but it's not the end of the world, and it's something that you can compensate with social policy, in particular in a rich country like Germany, which has low debt levels, low debt to GDP ratio. I think the policies that we've been discussing, or Axel suggested, which is to give everyone a free electric heater, would be more costly or more inefficient, or both.
But they would help. They would help to tide over the winter, and that's not costly. That's necessary.
But I think so. My point is, I think we're going to get over the winter anyway at relatively moderate economic costs, because people and firms are relatively good at adapting and saving energy and substituting, which is that's just something we know about how market economies work. People and firms are good at adapting and innovating, and once prices increase, people are going to cut consumption. And I've been collecting these examples from industry in Germany. They're huge numbers. So for example, Mercedes-Benz, I think Daimler just announced they can just reduce their gas consumption by 50% in Germany. Even
by
companies
what?
by 50%.
Exactly. By what? By not heating ancillary rooms, showrooms, corridors, and the likes.
Sure. So that's fine then, right? So
I'm completely with you. I'm just talking about the fact that I don't want any further gas purchased at all, and that is possible if you switch everyone who is currently a preferred shielded customer and a non-electric heating customer to electric heating. My point is it's even possible without doing that.
My point is it's possible, and look at our paper. We set it out how it's done, and we don't use this margin, and we think it's very possible.
Have you looked at the small to medium sized towns which actually make up all those areas where gas has proliferated in past 20 years? Because I don't care about the 50 largest cities of Germany. They can be dealt with. These are high density urban areas. I care about the areas where people work hard, and the small and medium-sized industry of Germany is there, and they have their houses, which by hook and by crook, and by incentives of the German governments and its state administrations and its state governments, in recent years converted to gas. And they have very little else to do. So unless we help them, they are more at risk.
But again, what they can do is turn on the thermostat, and it's not that much to ask to turn on your thermostat by 2 degrees, I think. Okay, look, guys, I have to go because I have some childcare constraints.
No worries, Ben. It was a pleasure. We need more numbers. We need to have you back and talk to other guys.
Right. Yeah. If you can send me the spreadsheet by the listener from earlier, that'd be interesting.
Of course, with pleasure. Thank you for taking the time.
Thanks everyone. Have a good.
Thanks, Ben.
Nice to talk to you.
See you back again.
Ciao.
Thanks, Ben.
Short disclaimer, because we spoke about Manuela Schwesig. She's a traitor. That's all.
Sorry, what Charmant wie Brot?
Manuela Schwesig, or I like to call her Manuela Valeria Schwesig, the ruler of the Oblast Mecklenburg-Gazproman, is a traitor, and she belongs to the court.
I don't doubt that this is a very good idea to persecute.
Axel, I have sent you something in the DM about nuclear facilities what will stay on longer than presumed. And I had a question for you, Axel. What do you know about the The deal with Spain to deliver gas to Germany.
That's interesting because the pass through, I mean, this is Algerian gas predominantly passing through Spain. If I'm not quite mistaken, there are a number of technical issues still to be resolved. I read two things about it last week, and I don't have a reasoned good answer for you now. If you give me a bit of time, I might be able to come back to you. I also want to talk to two guys who are actually doing gas procurement in Germany, if that's okay.
Yes, I can also send you some links because there is
With pleasure.
news. There is some news about it.
Yeah, I read stuff yesterday and today, but I don't have a reasonably formed opinion. I would be amiss if I were to say something now.
Okay, don't matter about it. Don't worry about it.
Dankjewel.
Graag gedaan.
Мінування місцевості на підходах до наших оборонних позицій, вона зберігає наші оборонні спроможності для відсічі наступу. Дієву допомогу надають керівники органів місцевого самоврядування.
Finance. Quick question for you as the official representative of Atacam's brand cigarettes. Are you considering of getting into some sort of partnership with any, what shall we say, metadata encoding website, encoding technologies for pictures? Maybe some that optimize the encoding of GPS coordinates onto pictures taken by Russians on their phones?
Sir, this is a little bit too advanced for Atacam's brand cigarettes. We just like to remind everybody that smoking kills and suggest using our products only responsibly, which is to say right next to the Russian ammo dumps. GPS encoding, these kinds of things, they're beyond our capabilities. We're just the smoking company that appreciates when things go boom.
Well, see, I'm asking because there's something very impressive that went boom yesterday in Lysychansk. Specifically a very, very large Russian command post with reportedly over 100 Russian officers and troops ending up in the completely flattened building. And by flattened, I mean it's where there used to be a building, there's now a plaza with about 4 feet tall rubble pile on it. But apparently that was done, and that was easy to do, because even though they didn't disclose their address, they instead did disclose the coordinates at which they were taking pictures, because they were in the metadata of the pictures that they were posting on social media. So I thought, one leads to the other. Maybe the GPS coordinates are sort of a gateway drug.
We don't believe that it has anything to do with that. We know that they were just smoking right there. We're pretty sure they were using our king size product. It's 1,000 kilogram product, not the 500 kilogram regular size. So we're pretty sure they're using the king size product, and they're having a nice, good smoke. The Russians like their cigars. Life's cheap there, and they're having a nice, good smoke and enjoying being genocidal rapists. And things sometimes happen. They weren't smoking responsibly, and as we like to say here at Atacam Cigarettes, smoking kills.
And they were so excited, the ceiling caved in, and then the other ceiling and the other ceiling and the roof. Must have been a good party.
We're hoping that our sister company will get a little more business. The Neptune brand cigar, we haven't really seen it in action recently. The Ukrainians enjoyed half of one and then handed it over to their friends on the Moskva. But ever since then, the Russians haven't tried to share one with them, and we can't figure out why. We thought it was a great product, works effectively, once-in-a-lifetime experience.
I'm still wondering as to when I can get my Harms pipe tobacco.
Get your hands on what? Sorry, I have horrendous background noise.
There is this Harms pipe tobacco, which you promised yesterday.
No, sir, that's an American product. We don't have that here. There's no Harms pipe tobacco in Ukraine. We don't sell that product. It doesn't exist. It's only in America. We know absolutely nothing about that. If any Russian radar happens to be being destroyed, that is absolutely not the Harms pipe tobacco. We have no clue what's going on with that.
Але ми не стоїмо на місці. Щодня відправляємо
Well, I shall have to wait.
заходи безпосередньо в районах виконання завдань.
Sir, you can call your manager about that, but we make no claims to Harms Pipe Tobacco. It is 100% never used here in Ukraine. And we'd like to remind you that, Ukraine only flies MiGs. Harms Pipe Tobacco is only for the American planes. There's absolutely no way that could be being used. And it's just a mystery why, Russian radar keeps going up in smoke. Maybe it's like other air defense. It was just inflatable to begin with. And we would like to note that an old-fashioned Lucky Strike will...
What is it with these ad accounts, advertisements, that they always get cut short?
Sorry, I just lost all audio for a second.
We lost you.
I was commenting that if, it's the normal air defense that they're using, the radars are like the other air defense and they're, entirely inflatable, then an old-fashioned Lucky Strike will take that. You don't need our premier Atacams brand 1,000-pound product or this mysterious American product people keep telling us we have, that we 100% deny absolutely is not found in the battle space.
George.
Hey, is Axel still on here? Is that you, Axel?
Yeah, I'm still here. I'm just wondering when I can find my pipe tobacco.
Okay, I actually had a question for the other gentleman that was on here, but I'm going to ask you. Don't you think it would be a good idea if they want to cut gas consumption in Germany, that they should start off with all the government offices, especially the Bundestag, like set the temperature to 60 degrees this winter? They can all wear a nice smoking jacket or something like that. I mean,
I like your idea. I really like your idea. We should definitely forward this. I shall make it one of my joys to work with a friend of our program, Jessica Berlin, to advertise exactly that. Good point.
No, because the government's the one that screwed their people, right? They put them in this predicament with their stupid policies. Merkel, I call her Merkel the murderer because she's got blood on her hands. Schroeder, don't even get me started on that guy. But they should lower their temperature down to like 58, 60 degrees in all the government buildings. And having lived in Germany and seeing how many government buildings they have, that would be a nice 10% cut in maybe usage. I don't know about you, but maybe you have better numbers than me, Axel.
I think we should work on that.
Dr. Ray?
So, hi guys. I had two questions. So, one question is, would it be possible, and how much could it replace if natural gas is being replaced with liquid petroleum gas that is basically side product of production of natural gas and of refinement of oil? And the other question is, did you guys comment before or see anything about European banks and also Wall Street are restarting to trade with Russian bonds and these kind of things? Thank you.
I haven't looked at the Bloomberg earlier today. I haven't seen anybody trading in Russian bonds other than the secondary market. Tim?
Not having access to a Bloomberg yet, I would have worse information than you on that, Axel, I'm afraid. I think it depends if we're talking about ruble-denominated bonds or Russian Euro bonds, for want of a better phrase. What are Russian Euro bonds called?
the defaulted trash bonds. I'm sure they're being traded by someone. I mean, the Russian railway bond, which went over the hill, that certainly is being traded by someone in the secondary market for defaulted debt. I'm quite sure. But then again, there is no sanction against that. This is just essentially speculation in a defaulted asset class.
How do you even settle that, though? Presumably they can't go through Euroclear. Russian domestic.
No, I think they have to do this. Documents against payment.
So literally chaps on motorcycles.
Law firms. I mean, law firms have partners with motorcycles, but yeah, DPC.
Входило ще 4 керівника підрозділів контролю за обігом зброї Національної поліції в Києві та інших регіонах. За різні суми неправомірної вигоди.
So no one has any idea about the liquid petroleum gas, right?
Документів на право зберігання.
That was going to be one of my questions for Ben Moll, but we didn't quite get to it. I'd be interested to hear that as well. Looking at how LPG ships, those big cargo ship-looking things with 3 bubbles on the top, that seems to be a very, very inefficient way of moving gas about the world to me. Does anybody have any more int on that?
Well, basically, it's liquid gas what's in there. So the liquid becomes the gas, and the volume is much more than what you expect to have in volume of liquid.
Yeah, I mean, I get that, but even still, compared to a pipe, it seems a ridiculous way of moving gas. But maybe in my physics, it's not quite up to scratch here. Is liquid gas a significantly less volume than gas? I really don't know.
Yes, about a factor of 1,000. That's a rule of thumb for gases versus liquids and solids, roughly. And yes, it makes a big difference because, one ship versus 1,000 ships and all that. It's significant. The problem is the infrastructure that goes into making it actually usable. Specifically, you need not just interestingly, compressing the gas is not that difficult necessarily. The safe regasification can be a little bit more complicated, shockingly enough, because you need to do it particularly controlledly, and apparently that's something that's not that easy to do engineering-wise. I mean, it is. You just need sufficient... we know how to do it very well. You just need sufficient capacity to do it. And that's what's currently lacking in Europe, and especially currently lacking in Germany, which... you don't want to necessarily have to transit these things very long distances, and obviously you would like to be able to put it where there is an existing pipeline network, so you don't need to build an additional pipeline network. So one pretty good idea was, why not put a giant LNG terminal where Nord Stream 2 was supposed to connect with the German pipeline network, right? That would be perfect because all the pipelines are already built. It's on the sea because obviously it comes from under the sea, so it'd be pretty optimal. And hopefully, had appropriate planning been done ahead of time, there could have been a very large facility built there by the end of the year. Had appropriate planning been done ahead of time. Anyway, it is how it is.
Speaking of appropriate planning, Doman, the Lithuanians, as in many cases, are ahead of the curve on this. They built a liquid petroleum gas terminal. I believe
liquid natural gas. LPG and LNG are different things. That's why when Dr. Brain was asking about LPG specifically, that's why I said that nobody knows anything about this, right? Because I don't either. They're different. Their chemical composition is different, let's say. They're similar things, but they're not the same thing. So it's an LNG terminal that they're building at Klaipėda. Yes, it's very good.
Yeah, I was about to say, sorry, I don't know the subtle distinctions. I'm not, as are one of our mods and one of our listeners, a chemical engineer, I'm afraid. Certainly not a Cambridge one. But the Lithuanians did build an LNG terminal at Klaipėda in 2014. So I guess they saw the writing on the wall there, and I believe this has been an astounding success. And they have weaned themselves off Russian gas completely. I think I'm correct. Maybe a Cambridge-educated chemical engineer could give us a bit more color on that.
Yeah, if you can find one, let me know. So anyway, it is how it is. But yes, good idea that they've managed to get themselves energy independent from Russia very, very, very quickly on, even though they do consume quite a bit of gas domestically still. My understanding is Latvia has a giant gas storage quantity as well, which I think is somewhat interesting. Right, Sharmantvi had his hand up a minute ago and then dropped it, I think possibly accidentally.
No, I did it on purpose. I thought about the question to discuss with Axel, but I think it's not that important. Thank you.
What? It's not important to discuss questions with Axel? Sharmantvi Brot, I'm disappointed.
Yeah, okay, I will try it, but I think it's the second time I thought about it, it's not.
Don't worry, send me a message.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I can send it.
Unless it is funny and disproves our other co-host's idea that Germans have no humor.
Okay, if you want a funny thing, then I will just repeat my joke from 5 months ago. To build a drone was able to find looted washing machines and kill them, because this is 100% chance to kill some badniks with it.
Well done, Miele and Bosch.
I give you another one. NATO has 5th generation fighter jets. The only thing Russia has in 5th generation are alcoholics.
This is better than Yehuda. You should continue.
Oh no, you can't do this on Yehuda. I mean,
no. But you should carry on. Really dispel various stereotypes about Germans. This is your opportunity. The world is listening.
Doman, get a glass
Don't
of wine.
put the pressure on me.
Just seriously, this was nice.
It's not saying
the 5th generation alcoholic.
Yes, it was.
Nice.
I'm agreeing. It was an excellent joke. I'm saying he should continue cracking jokes and dispel the wrongful stereotypes that people have about Germans and German humor. It's not that I share those stereotypes. I'm just saying this is the perfect opportunity for him to rattle on a few dozen more, because the world is listening and the world has to correct the stereotypes they have about Germans and German humor. I'm in agreement. I'm not in disagreement. And it hurts me that you interpreted it otherwise.
Bernard, get me the red file. Tim, what's happening in Salisbury Plains?
I believe our Canadian friends have come and are starting to instruct Ukrainian tank crews. That's my latest information on what's happening on Salisbury Plain.
That's interesting. Tim, no, not so fast, Tim, not so fast. Why would Canadians instruct Ukrainian tank crews? What are the Canadians familiar with the Ukrainians might use in future?
Well, there is a tank which is made by a minor European industrial power. It's called the Tiger.
The Leclerc, I think, is the minor industrial power.
Or the Lion. It's some kind of big cat. No, of course I'm teasing. The Canadians use Leopard 2. And we had a discussion on this on the chat the other day about the interchangeability of tank crews. The conclusion was that yes, it's kind of possible, but you really want to train them on the platform they're actually going to be using. So a load of Canadian trainers show up on Salisbury Plain, which is, I believe, the only training area in the UK for heavy armour. I may be wrong on that. It's certainly the only one I've been to. And they're training Ukrainians on the use of Leopard 2, which is a tank that the Canadians use.
And Tim, explain to me, why would the Canadians only send people who are armour and gunners?
I'm not really sure. I don't know where you're going with that, actually, I'm afraid.
Well, if the Canadians only send people who can train armour crews and gunners, it's probably for armour and gunners, right?
Yes, I would probably say so. Yes.
It's hard to deny, I know. Bernard tries all the time, but it's hard to deny. So, as a consequence, if that is the case, the Canadians were so kind as to send people who are familiar with Leopard 1s and Leopard 2s, and they only send those who are armor and gunners to train Ukrainians in the area where the Brits have one of their best training grounds for armor and guns. They're probably training them on parachuting, right?
Axel, quick question for you. What did the Canadians operate before the Leopard 2?
The Leopard 1.
Centurion, wasn't it?
The Leopard 1 and the Centurion.
So even maybe if Leopard 2s aren't on order, are there any Leopard 1s left around that could be potentially sent to Ukraine instead?
I thought I heard something like it, that they were standing somewhere in a yard, in a rail yard in Edmonton. I thought even we had someone who we know who's been there and looked at it recently, meaning as in yesterday.
Oh, so you say yesterday. I thought you meant the Pope, because he was in Edmonton some weeks ago.
No. It was not the Pope. I think it was some kind of an elk.
A particularly belligerent, militant type of elk.
Yeah, a belligerent, militant, Canadian
bellicose
type of elk. Bellicose, yes. Really bellicose elk, true. Then, John, what's a bellicose elk in Swedish?
Say again?
What is a bellicose elk in Swedish?
The only thing we have is älg.
Okay. Yeah, I think in Canadian it's battle moose.
Ah, okay. Yeah, of course. But I'm Swedish, so what do I know?
Öland.
My fella, he was making some jokes before. Maybe I should tell a real story, because it's a little bit of a quiet period, if you don't mind.
No, please, as long as it's not humor, that's fine, because we don't want to, in any shape, we will try to dispel the notion that Swedes are humor.
No, this is history lesson, actually. So what happened was that Putin died, and he went to hell. So after a few years, they gave him a day off, and he went to a bar in Moscow. And there he asked the bartender, so Crimea, ours? Yes, ours. Donbass, also ours. Kiev, also ours. Great. How much do I owe? €5.
I love it. But
the
good thing about Moscow... No, it's okay. I think I get it. This is a projecting into the future something positively, because he's not paying in renminbi or yuan.
Exactly. Euros. That's the catch. So it's a true story, kind of.
I mean, let me put it this way. There is this famous image, now many people know it, but I think I posted it in the first week of this specific invasion, of this wonderful restaurant, this bistro, which upon Stalin's death advertised that they would serve free borscht in honor of Stalin's, and in memory and remembrance and in celebration of Stalin's death. I'm quite sure that I can find at least 42, if not 44 million Ukrainians. I would hope that I can find 44 of them who are willing to celebrate in the moment the Kremlin actually dies. Maybe that comes closer than we think.
One can hope.
And in the meantime, we fight. I can see a fellow Scandi there, Peter, our Norwegian friend, who's been lurking around the space. Dom and Tim, if you want to invite him, I hope that he's not shied away. He's already waving his hand. He's not shied away by the dad jokes of Charmant Vivort and the clearly projecting into the future good stories of Denjon.
not to mention the most revolting pun that has ever been uttered on this chat about barcodes and Nordic naval vessels.
Peter, if you have the time and want to jump up, please do. I think we'd love to talk to you.
No. Can I say something about Swedish energy? How it looks?
Why don't you talk about the beauty of and the comfort you have as a Swede in having good neighbors?
Yeah, we do. Where do you want to start? We have many.
Well, you have fantastic NATO neighbors in Norway and in Finland, right?
Yeah, correct. And also Denmark, another NATO soon-to-be friend. Well, we are soon-to-be.
That must be one of the great things about living in Sweden, right next to Norway. Is you don't even have to buy gas. You just go outside with a bucket or a balloon or some similar inflatable. You fill it up with air, and then you can burn that.
Honestly, it's a little bit of a thorn in the side because I think it was in the 80s, the CEO, the president of Volvo, actually wanted to make a deal with I think what is now Statoil, which is now something else again. But so they wanted to go into a partnership where actually Norwegian gas would have been 50% Swedish, and Volvo would have been 50% Norwegian. Something like that. Maybe it wasn't 50-50, but something like that. But it fell through, unfortunately.
Things happen. Question for Peter. Peter, very welcome. Thank you very much for joining us this evening. It's a pleasure yet again. Very quick question. Maybe you can give us a bit more color on the discussions in Norway at the moment as to Norway's sovereign state wealth funds having attained such a massive windfall profit, and how Norway could actually help Ukraine balance out Ukraine's invasion-afflicted budget.
Hi, Axel. Thank you very much. Hi, Domen and Tim and all the rest of you. I just dropped by the space to listen in. I don't have much time. I'm sorry about that, but I would gladly answer your question, Axel. We have had profits definitely during this crisis, but we've also had losses. And today, the head of the Sovereign Wealth Fund actually presented new numbers that show that we have lost approximately 10% of the entire value of the Sovereign Wealth Fund. So it's all it's not only good news for us in that respect. However, of course, we have large profits on the horizon. I think we will recoup and definitely our aim is to distribute much of that wealth back to our friends and partners and contribute in the rebuilding of Ukraine. So if I'm not mistaken, I think we have pledged perhaps one of the largest sums to the rebuilding of Ukraine. I'm not sure, I need to double check the numbers, but we are definitely ready to...
You're in the top 5. You are
yes.
in the top 5, no question.
Okay, yeah. So my numbers were at least partially correct. I'll check the details later. But yeah. So we are invested through the fund. We are invested in almost all businesses and branches around the world. So we have lost many billions of Norwegian kroners in the past months.
That's a good point, and thank you for highlighting this. Because when this news trickled in at shortly after 10 o'clock our time this morning in Estonia, we were slightly shocked to see that $174 billion had been lost in the stocks and bonds portfolio because seemingly the Sovereign Wealth Fund, as you just said, has invested all across the whole global markets, and therefore it has suffered a significant reduction. Notably, it is still $1.3 trillion large, and it also has a number of short positions and a number of futures positions, which, if the war pans out fine, meaning Ukraine wins within 2 years, will more than recover what has been lost.
Let's hope so. Much of the sovereign wealth fund is tied to future expenses like pensions and such. So unfortunately, I would like ideally to take out a lot of those billions of Norwegian kroners and use them on weapons and support to Ukraine. But alas, we need to be a bit more cool-headed. But I can assure you guys that the Norwegian support for Ukraine remains steadfast, and we're having interesting discussions right now. Once again, I'm sorry, I can't go into details, but we are having interesting discussions on a number of issues on how we can support Ukraine and strengthen sanctions against Russia. So,
Peter, we're very much looking forward to that. We are exceptionally glad that Norway is leading the way in both the analysis and research, as well as the intricate planning for actions against the Russian Federation. Very much appreciated, and thank you.
Thank you, Axel.
As well as very appreciative of Norway's contribution to training the Ukrainian army in the UK.
Actually, on that point, has the number ever been released, Peter?
No, it hasn't. When I talked to you guys on the space a week or two ago, I was aware of the plans to send Norwegian assistance to the UK, but the details are still not public. But we will cooperate with our Nordic partners, and I guess the contribution will be at approximately the same level as them.
Yeah, makes sense. That's roughly where it was expected as well, right, Axel?
Yes. By the way, Peter, one more thing which I may add. I found it very interesting that the overweighting, that's not true, that's not fair. The weighting, the appropriate weighting, the Sovereign Wealth Fund has had in regard to technology stocks has, of course, hit them hard. I understand anywhere between 28.4 and 28.5%, somewhere in the middle. This may seem a little bit pedantic, but it is a massive amount of money still attached to this. Percent of losses were in technology stocks. So Norway was willing to bet a large part of its future on innovation and technology, and it still can, because it has that strength in savings, sustain such a loss. That in itself is stunning. Oh, we lost Peter. I'm sorry. Tim, now I have to talk about chips, crisps, the difference, and why Gunny isn't here.
Getting Peter back.
Yep. On that note, we may have to put that conversation on hold because Peter, our favourite Norwegian MP, assuming he is our favourite Norwegian MP, is coming back up. Peter, you're back.
Yes, I lost Axel in the middle of his question, so I didn't catch all of it. I'm sorry about that. I think it was a technical issue on my part.
Yes, we call that Twitter pox. It's what happens when, you get the picture. It's Twitter pox.
No, Peter, I was just making actually a passing comment, highlighting the fact that Norway was willing to bet on technology stocks heavily and the innovation strain in its portfolio. And it took a loss in the first half of this year because overall, globally, technology stocks got a beating and beyond 28.4%. And therefore, there's an overweight of losses which have dragged down the portfolio. The thing is, what I find stunning about it is that overall the portfolio is still so strong, and Norway is willing to make that punt. It's willing to bet on the future, and that sends a great signal to the world, and I think it's great. So it was more a comment than a question.
A very good comment indeed. You are better than most of the financial commentators in the Norwegian press, by the way. So you should comment on Norwegian economics and finance more often, Axel.
I have a number of friends in Norway, amongst them people at Norscan Partners, and I can definitely tell they are very conservative people. They never raise their voice, but I'm happy to go to bat for them. And I think that your people are doing the right thing.
I think, Peter, you could have shortened that comment quite considerably and said that Axel is better than most of the financial commentators.
Definitely.
Mates, too much flattery. Thank you.
Goes a long way.
And completely unwarranted, of course.
Nina.
Thank you, Tim. For Peter, jag tror att det är Peter som du säger. A question: how is the atmosphere? How does the Norwegian people think about Sweden and Finland going to NATO? I doubt that you have been discussing this, but as you are here, I wanted to ask this question. Thank you.
Thank you, Nina. There's a vast support for Swedish and Finnish NATO membership in Norway, undoubtedly. And there was almost a non-existent political debate about whether or not we should I forgot the word. Ratified. Yes, thank you very much. Ratify it in Parliament. Of course, as most other Nordic countries, we have these strange, exotic fellows in the communist parties. There are usually one or two members of Parliament, and they, of course, at the time being, we have 5 or 6 of them actually, but I think they refused to ratify the Swedish and Finnish accession to NATO, but otherwise it was a slam dunk case, and we're all very happy that we will be NATO partners very soon. Just hope that our friend in Turkey will sort his things out and get back in line.
Now,
Peter,
I ask Peter.
It's Turkey. It's Turkey, not Turkey.
Turkey. Yeah, sorry.
Turkey.
No. You know, you got it backwards. The country is Turkey. The meat bird is Turkey. That's what we've agreed upon. Make it perfectly clear.
Let's
I got it always mixed up.
Let's agree to call it the Ottoman Empire or the Sublime Porte, and then we won't get so confused. Peter, does this joining of Sweden and Finland into NATO, does that solve security and strategic problems for Norway, in your view?
I think it does. We will have 2 strong military partners in the Arctic and the northern flank of NATO, so that will be a great relief. I also think that it I expect Sweden and Finland to up their military support to Ukraine once they are a part of NATO, because I think Finland started out really great. I haven't seen the latest military assistance to the Ukraine. I'm sorry, Ukraine, but I think it has lagged a bit. It's possibly Yeah, you can fill me in. Fill me in.
Axel, hot
I
mic.
took your thing.
Sorry, I think Axel is talking to his poodles. He has a lot of poodles.
I thought he was calling on me, so it could have been. but Nina, you can perhaps fill me in on the latest on Finland's military aid to Ukraine, because to me it seems to have lagged a bit, and that's perfectly understandable because Finland needs to protect their own borders and maintain their security in this vital period and process going into NATO.
Thank you, Peter. Finland took quite early tactic that we are not telling what we are sending, when we are sending, or where it's sent. So just keeping it like so to say undercover, not letting the enemy know know about it too much. And we had actually the general, is it major general or general major? Anyway, Pekka
Major
Toveri.
General.
Major General. Yeah, Pekka
But it
Toveri.
doesn't matter because he was the chief of military intelligence, which outranks everything else.
Okay, but we had
the boss. You had the boss.
Yeah, we had the boss here was it last Friday? No, Monday.
On Monday, 2 days ago.
Yeah, well, I have lost count. And he said that the situation is. Are you laughing at me? The situation is that we are actually being a little bit cautious at the moment because we need to see this NATO membership to be ratified. Because, of course, we have lived with Russia behind our border for like always, and we have a long border with Russia. So we need to be cautious. But I am sure that, as you said, Peter, that when the NATO membership is ratified, he also said that he is sure that we are going to boost a little bit more help, but it's not going to be advertised either. Thank you.
It makes perfect sense. Thank you, Nina.
Thank you, Nina. Thank you, Peter. Peter, I think we might have one of your possible constituents here, Knut Olav.
Yes, hi, thank you. I'm sorry to nerd out about Norwegian politics, but there's something I've been very curious about that Peter might actually know. So I wanted to ask the Norwegian military support has been, I wish it had been bigger, but it's perhaps been more than I would have expected from this government, if you add it all up. So the Paladins and the Mistrals and the ammunition for the Gepards and maybe something more on air defense. And so I was wondering if you know or can say who the kind of prime mover in this is. Is it, I know of course the government in consultation with Parliament makes the decisions, but is it the government themselves who are coming up with this?
It's a good question. I think in the beginning the government dragged their feet and was way too reluctant. But being a minority government is a challenge, and therefore the opposition played a vital role, I think. We pushed for weapon supplies even before the invasion. And after the invasion, or the full-scale invasion, we upped the pressure, to say it mildly. And luckily, we have a very good defense minister, and he's doing his very best. I think, however, that another government would send even more military aid. So it's not all good, but it's way better than expected from the government we have.
Sorry, Knut, I had to move you down earlier because I noticed that you lost audio and thought you were still audible. But I think Peter got all of your question, actually, because you lost audio just before you finished.
Okay, thank you.
How do we, Petter, how do we get the Norwegian defense minister on our space?
A very good question indeed. I am actually on some sort of political, what do you call it?
It's a political
festival. It's like a festival. It's a week-long festival right now in the southern parts of Norway, where all the political elites and lobbyists and NGOs are gathering in the town called Arendal. I think Sweden has something similar. So I will meet him here probably in a day or two. I'll ask him to come on the space. I can't promise anything, but I'll try it. It would be very interesting indeed.
Petter, we had Ben Hodges here, Mick Ryan, Mark Hertling. I'd say we have an eclectic mix. We have had, for example, most recently also the one Brzezinski I really like, Ian Brzezinski, former Deputy National Security Advisor to the United States government. I'd say this is a space where we can discuss stuff. And if there's one party I would really like to have more info from, then it's Norway. So sincerely appreciate all your time and whenever you come on, but definitely we'd like to hear from our Norwegian allies.
I will do my very best, Axel, and I definitely know all the names you listed. I've been listening as often as I can in between work and often when working. It's been absolutely astonishing what you guys have achieved in this space. It's really, really helpful also in my daily work and my efforts to try to support Ukraine as much as possible. So thank you very much. I need to be out now in a couple of minutes, but I'll be back as a listener now and then. But thank you everybody.
Peter, just before you disappear, I have one last very quick question. These the Norwegian contribution to the British training efforts for the Ukrainian army, what are they doing? What are the Norwegians contributing to this? Do you know?
I know that they will go into the existing program together with our Nordic partners, travel to the UK and assist as consultants and trainers. I don't know the specifics though. I don't even know the exact number, but I think it's a substantial contribution.
Because I recall doing an exercise with the Norwegian Navy, I believe it was, and we did a 45-minute course on how to take a shit outdoors when it's -30. Is that the sort of thing we're doing? Is it kind of winter warfare contribution building up to the winter, or do you really have no idea?
I really have no idea, but it seems like a Norwegian speciality and a very, very unique Arctic skill. And I don't know about Ukrainian winters, but they don't seem very mild. They seem very harsh. So perhaps this particular Arctic skill will be transferred to our Ukrainian friends in the UK training. Let's hope so.
You can always ask a Finn. You can always ask a Finn.
Well, I live here in Estonia. Fortunately, in the depths of winter, I've never had to perform that particular ablution outside. But you never know, so it's nice to have had the training. You know, it's nice to know how it's done.
We're so happy that the Norwegians specialize in SOF and mechanized infantry, light infantry warfare, that they have some of the best anti-air and artillery defense officers, counter-battery officers. There's so much to be learned, and they're great. I'm not trying to flatter anyone.
I think we sent one of the absolute best people to train the Afghan army, and we have also done training on others as well, and the results have been great, especially in training SOF personnel. So let's hope that the Norwegian special operators will be part of this, because the results will definitely be good.
100%.
Thank you very much for your time, Peter. And hope to see you again on the speaker section, or just the listener section, where I see you quite regularly. And I'm very, very glad that we have people who, can affect things closer to government anyway than the lot of us here. It's always great to make sure to be sure that somebody is listening who can then talk to the real movers and shakers. Karl, go ahead.
Hey guys, and now it's a quiet time. I've had a number of things in recent weeks that have been in the back of my mind, so I might just hit a few of them. One of them in most recent days is, and then kind of the major Western media outlets, I've noticed more and more kind of talk, saying that it's kind of inevitable that the solution is a military victory, but a negotiated peace, which of course ties into Russian propaganda. What I'm interested in is is this something else that others have noticed, or maybe it's just a short-term thing, people writing articles after Kissinger wobbled his lips, and is this just something different to write? Or is there really kind of a slow movement forming kind of behind kind of that position? I know the support for Ukraine is pretty unprecedented, and we have enough of a buffer of support that we can probably afford a number of percentage points of people having that opinion. But I'm just curious if this is something others have noticed.
Садитесь. Оп. Давай. Запрыгивай.
Заходи, сыночка.
Оп.
Все, пока.
So, gentlemen, we're trying to get up Gurney and Craig, who are in the background, having a little chit-chat about the various merits and demerits of anti-air defense, as well as air power and the likes. And if and when they're ready, they'll have a word about it here. John.
I was just coming up to reply to Kiwi, but he appears to have vanished. So no worries, thank you.
Служба безпеки завершила досудове розслідування щодо злочинної
Well, why not reply anyway, John?
колишній перший заступник.
Well, I mean, I was just in reply to his question about this, the movement for a negotiated peace. I mean, Barry Posen was at it again a couple of days ago at the Cato Institute in the US. There's certainly a strand within the academic community, within the international relations academic community, that's very keen on the basis of a negotiated peace as soon as possible, on the basis that we have limited interests, we being the West, and I think specifically the US as well, have limited interests in Ukraine. Obviously, I disagree with that, and I think the moral component now is overwhelming, and that isn't something that I would have taken seriously prior to this war. But then again, I didn't expect to see a genocide in Europe. So, I mean, this goes above and beyond far beyond what happened in Bosnia, which was absolutely horrifying at the time. So, yeah, it was, as I say, it was just to reply to him directly and say yes, it is something that's out there. I don't think it's penetrating particularly policy circles, certainly in English-speaking countries at the moment. But I couldn't speak to what's going on in policy circles on the continent.
Thank you. Sorry, I just dropped off because I lost audio. But I did hear your response.
Well, there is, of course, scope for a negotiated settlement, but the negotiating points are, how much is Russia going to pay Ukraine for peace? That's really the negotiating point, right? It's not about territory. It's not going to be about, where's the new border here or there? No, the new border is the internationally recognized border of Ukraine. And the negotiating point is, actually, Russia, you fucked this situation up, so now you pay for it. That's the negotiating point.
Yeah, quite so, Tim. And it was interesting, again, a couple of days ago. Apparently Kissinger has now recanted from his previous position as well. So I can only assume that the checks stopped coming. Or perhaps he has, for the first time in the 90-odd years he's had on this planet, a moment of moral clarity. But I wouldn't bank on that one.
I have, maybe this is a medical question. How is Henry Kissinger still alive?
Oh, you'd need to ask Yehuda.
It's absolutely extraordinary. That man must be over 100 by now.
I thought he was 98 or something.
Yeah, he's well into his 90s.
I already found the triangulations of William Jefferson Clinton, Nobody Left to Lie to, bad enough. But when I read the treatise by the converted former Trotskyist, Mr. Hitchens, on Mr. Kissinger, I found it perfectly poignant that somebody is abusing the fact that he escaped from the Holocaust in order to then misdirect US foreign policy to the point that the USA would actually sacrifice itself to China.
I see you're also a fan of the more intelligent Hitchens brother.
I'm sorry, which one is that?
Peter, of course. Peter, crikey, Dermot.
Yeah, he's become a bit of a nihilist of late, to be honest.
Well, to be honest, I'm a British conservative as well, and I'm a bit of a nihilist. I can see exactly where it's coming from on all of this stuff. But we risk delving into domestic political culture wars, so I'll leave it there. But I'm a bit of a Hitchens fanboy. I've got all of his books and I've read all of them.
But
And I reread all of them regularly.
Peter Hitchens is at war with himself.
Yes, he is. He is at war with himself, and it's slightly tragic. Maybe we should get him on. I'm sure he'd be interesting because he is very good at this stuff. Who do I know who knows Peter Hitchens? I'm going to have a think about
I once literally crashed into him. And by me crashing into him, I mean he crashed into me in the street because he was going around the corner and it wasn't looking. Just saying. Now, I think let's unhitch ourselves of that ASAP. Let's see what Nina has to say, and by then, hopefully, Gurney will have connected, and we can go to some things that go boom and some things that go whoosh. Nina.
Thank you, Domen. And before things go boom, I'm sure that you have been discussing maybe for hours this quote-unquote rehearsal of Russian army with China. But I read something that was I got some kind of piece when I read it, and if you don't mind, I can read a small part of it, if it's okay.
Is it about Tajikistan participating?
No. This is after the major attack on Ukraine, we have been able to look at how the lessons of bulging military exercises can be applied in real life. During this autumn's Vostok, many Russians will probably ask quietly in the country if the country can really afford to release its resources for large-scale exercises when the progress in Ukraine has been anything but as expected. In China, on the other hand, we have to think about what kind of message it sends to the world that the country is rattling weapons alongside a country like Russia. The Chinese Ministry of Defense announced right away on Wednesday that participation in Vostok is not related to the prevailing international or regional situation, but is part of ongoing cooperation between the countries. The ministry's statement reminded that although China is officially an increasingly close partner to Russia, it has been cautious in its words regarding the war in Ukraine. The West will be set up and not participate in a forced war, but at the same time, Russia has been required to show composure between the lines and be ready to resolve the war with diplomacy. And also it said that this is some kind of theater, but this is what I got. What do you think about that?
Well, fundamentally, this theater. But Nina, I thought you were there when we covered this towards the end of Vincent's appearance earlier. That's why I was confused why you're bringing it up again. It is very much. No, it's okay. It is very much theater, and I think you pointed out one thing here that wasn't really covered previously.
Sorry, Domen, I didn't actually be here, so I didn't hear it before.
Yes, that was my failure, because I thought you were for that bit and clearly not. Let's highlight one point here, right? Russians themselves are questioning, why are people doing all these exercises? But Ukraine is not doing very well. I mean, Russians aren't doing very well in Ukraine, right? They've made no progress over the past month. There's a map circulating a few days ago. Russian lines on I think the 14th of August versus the 10th of July. And they're just literally the same everywhere. It's just squiggles slightly by the thickness of the line here and there. So yes, absolutely, there will be questions. However, for China, the questions are very different. For China, the questions are how can they maximize Russian, what shall we call it, subservience right now to China. What can China do to make sure that China benefits the most out of this it possibly can? Thank you, Nina. Right, shall we go to Carl, and then we're going to go to Craig. Carl.
Hey, so my next topic is, some months ago we would often hear intercepted comms from, say, Russian soldiers and their family and the like, and I just haven't heard much of that lately, and I just don't know if that's just a lack of anyone focusing on it, or that maybe Russia has gotten better at making sure that these things don't happen, or whether there's actually anything interesting that I've just missed.
Oh, they still happen. There was a very recent one where the mother was didn't really care about what happened to her son. However, she did care what he did with his iPhone 13 because they were still paying it off. And that was basically the entire call, was her interrogating her son, whom she must have thought was previously dead, whom she must have previously thought was dead, about what he did with his phone. And that was it was kind of a tragic. It'd be comical were it not tragic. So these interceptions are still happening. There were some other recent ones about people wanting to go home and they were forced to go back and fight, even though they had tried to quit their contracts, which is against the laws, etc. So there are some. I have to admit, I'm not following them particularly closely, but they are certainly still ongoing.
Are you, Domen, are you seriously suggesting to us at this point that Russia is ignoring the law?
Shocking, isn't it? I mean,
that's really outrageous.
I don't know what I can tell you, but it does seem to be like that might well be true. Might just be. I don't know. Right, Craig, do you want to start us off?
Yeah, sure. So, it's been interesting that we've seen a lot of strikes on Russian airfields, and that is got the conversation started not just amongst us but amongst other people as to what's the point of all this, right? Why are you attacking airfields, right? Is it because airfields don't move, right? Airports don't move. They tend to have stuff that goes boom a lot, whether it be gasoline or bombs or what have you. And that started a follow-on conversation as to what else could Ukraine target with some of these systems. If we could just stick on the air part of this conversation for just a moment, it is, and I think multiple people have pointed this out, not just myself, how absolutely underwhelming the Russian Air Force has been in this war. It was supposed to be somewhat of a trump card with their generation fighters and their this and their that and their sophisticated aerial denial stuff, and it just hasn't panned out that way, right? We can talk about Russian ground forces and T-14 tanks breaking down, but I think what's the most revealing thing that when we started this war, I remember that one of the first things I did was, how do you conduct JTAC operations? This is ground tactical operations, right? And it's a very extremely complicated process. It's even more complicated if you don't have laser guided bombs like you do in the US, right? And you're just using dumb ordnance. And so what I wanted to do was just kind of try to highlight and bring to the conversation what we have seen lacking from the Russians in terms of their Air Force, both in capacity, in terms of volume of operations, but also in terms of operationally speaking, in terms of what they could have used them for if their Air Force had performed to par. So if I could just very briefly just kind of do a synopsis. Russia had one of the largest, before this war, Lord knows what their status is now, they're rapidly dropping, but it had one of the largest, quote-unquote, most sophisticated air forces in the world. Nowhere near the United States, of course, but still what you might consider to be first world, right? And that was supposed to be something that was going to drive this conversation in terms of where we saw this going, right? We had thought here in the West that one of the biggest issues facing the Ukrainians was air power from the Russians, right? One-on-one, man-to-man, the Ukrainian has proved himself to be, time and again, superior to the Russian in terms of fighting quality. But where a lot of people had thought that the battle was really going to turn was air power, right? Not so. And I think that Russia's poor performance in the air, when I mean poor, I'm being delicate. It has been an absolute catastrophe. That was actually the thing that tipped the balance in Ukraine's favor. Because if they cannot operate in the air, then it comes down to one-on-one, right? Man on man, who's smarter, tougher, and wants to, who has higher morale. And that's kind of where I find myself now. So when we see these targeting of airfields, I don't think that they're designed to limit Russia's tactical capacity. I think it's just because they're not going anywhere. And I'm sure, they don't move, right? And so I think that they're juicy targets, they're big targets, they go boom, they light up a lot. But in terms of overall tactical effect on the battlefield, I don't think that that those strikes are going to affect the battlefield on a day-to-day basis.
I just want to very briefly note that apparently Azerbaijan handed some laser-guided 250 kilogram munitions to Ukraine, which can be dropped off of a Sukhoi 25. They're a joint production between Azerbaijan and Turkey, and the laser guiding bit can be done by a Bayraktar TB2, which is nearby, and doesn't have to be done by the same plane that dropped it. So there is some capacity for laser guided stuff on the side of Ukrainians. And we have Gurney back. This is a seamless filibuster, I trust. Gurney.
Thanks, Dom. Hopefully my my microphone will stay on. Just push me down or say something real quick if it does happen. Yeah. So part of this. So Craig and I were DMing each other, and we're having a conversation here, and I think we agree on a lot of different points here, and I think maybe the difference is, and that's what sort of prompted a discussion about what is the air power situation like? What does it look like in Ukraine? What doesn't it look like? I think we agree more than we disagree, but I'm just setting that up for as my response here. In that conversation that Craig, the specific one that Craig just mentioned, I'll open up at some other avenues maybe on the next go at this, but to respond to the Crimean portion of this, without putting like a larger thesis statement up first, let me try dabbling with this. So I'll disagree in the sense that the air power is not relevant, and I know that's a wide sweeping statement. So let me just focus to the last question here, because I'm trying to find a way to sort of insert into the conversation as it is right now, and that is Ukraine. My view is Ukraine would not be planning and executing these strikes in Crimea with whatever assets they are. And, in time of war, everything is precious, everything is limited, everything is rationed, right? We'll never have enough of a lot of things. So I do fundamentally disagree with what I believe Ukraine is doing, especially with the strikes in Crimea. And because I believe Ukraine is shaping the battlefield, and because I believe that air power, while it may be at parity or it may be nullified at times, it doesn't mean it's not having a wide-ranging, broad impact and effect across the battlefield. In my view, air power has, hand in hand with artillery, even if the reporting of it is not as outsized as the artillery, even if the OSINT crowd, it's harder to pin down. My thesis on this is that air power is absolutely critical and one of the defining factors of the Russian invasion of Ukraine, and because of that, so let me just back up for a second. Just because something may be nullified or lesser reported, or the effects of it, meaning that it's not every day we're seeing per se a bombing run, does not mean it's not occurring, or does not mean the threat of that, or the threat of a bunch of other things. But let me just focus to the specific part of Crimea, just to keep this to thread this part of the conversation. Because of that, if Ukraine wants to do any counteroffensive, in my view, they've been doing some suppression of air defenses. We saw a period there of about a week ago, after a HIMARS logistical period, attacking Russian ammo depots. We saw some AGM-88 show up to do some suppression, and there were like 10 to 14 radars that were destroyed. And some of these were guarding Novokakhovka, Kherson area, and then we sort of systematically saw Ukraine push that envelope forward in southern Kherson, up until we saw now these strikes on airfields and another ammunition depot in Crimea. So my view is that reinforces and supports the idea that air power is one of those deciding factors, even if it has not yet been decisive, is one of the deciding, if I had top three important factors, it'd be up there. And so what Ukraine is doing is they are trying to neutralize Russian air combat capability. They're trying to neutralize the ability of Russia to generate sorties. And we have some statements from the Ukrainians. Earlier in the war, the rate was, I think, at its highest, maybe 450 Russian air sorties, and that's theater-wide, and that's rotary and fixed wing. And then it was last week, I believe, they reported 300 sorties, and this week, I think, for one of the reporting days, they said theater-wide there was about 150 sorties. So the Ukrainians are suppressing that to a degree, but there's still a lot of air that happens, even if it doesn't relate in air-to-air combat, even doesn't end up in most of these aircraft going past or even, within 10 kilometers of the forward operating lines. It is significant and it can be decisive. And because of that, it's affecting everything does operationally with Ukraine. And I would have to assume that Russia is taking a similar position. We saw this play out with two different sides claiming airstrikes on Snake Island. Towards the end of Snake Island, we saw video to substantiate different airstrikes. So my point is using Crimea as an example, that's exactly why it's high on the priority list to nullify and neutralize Russian air power generation. And in Saki itself, just as part of it, there were revetments, there were some stored aircraft, but there was also a full flight line of 9 armed aircraft, and it looks like those were destroyed in place, not only because of the munitions next to them and on them that represent a significant and busy flight line. But anyway, so that's my thoughts on it, and I do feel that that's one of the underappreciated and underreported aspects of this, because it's both hard to observe, it's hard to understand the impacts of that, and it's hard to document that. So it doesn't enter the lexicon probably as much as HIMARS or other things. But my view is the impact is widespread, even if it's not causing widespread destruction, nor even close to artillery. So in that area, Craig, we agree that the these are not producing airstrikes that result in significant daily damage, though I do believe that's occurring, and we have heard reports on both sides of air power being used in strikes. But anyways, I'll pause there.
Okay, can you please do me a favor and identify technically where the disagreement is? Sorry.
Can I just highlight that this was absolutely perfectly said? Just because it's not as visible doesn't mean that it's not important now, that it hasn't been important to preserve before, and it won't have a strategic impact in the coming weeks. Gurney is absolutely 100% right.
I'd still really like to. Gurney, can you please identify the point of disagreement? So, Craig, are you saying that air power will not be important in the future, and Gurney, you're saying air power will be important in the future? Is that the point of disagreement?
So the point, I think, of disagreement, where we're finding our friction, is the extent to which air power can play a significant role in the war going forward, whether you are Ukraine or whether you are Russia. That is the point of disagreement. And what I would say is that these attacks on Russian airfields, while significant, while important, nobody's trying to take that away from you. Nobody's trying to take that away from anything, right? These are multi-million-dollar aircraft that are going up in smoke. The contention is to what extent the Russian Air Force plays a role now or in the future. And where I think, and somebody can stop me on this, where I think the disagreement is coming from is that
this message has been generated with municipal data.
Hypothesizing, not stating that these attacks on Russian airfields are due to the static nature of the equipment and I'll be succinct. The boom that you get due to ordnance and airframe gasoline that you need, because to run an aircraft, you need a different type of gasoline that you use to put in a truck, right? Everybody knows this. It's highly flammable, highly destructive, and it produces a very large boom, if you will. And so I would say that these are targets of opportunity.
This message has been generated with municipal data.
Not, I think, in a way to shape the battlefield in a way that is going to tip the balance, right? And here's I'll be succinct. The amount of difference we have seen on the battlefield due to the Russian Air Force is vastly overcome by the sheer amount of anti-aircraft systems, whether they be guns, whether they be missiles, whether they be electronic warfare, whether they be something else. I think we're overstating the influence that air power is having on this war, because this is not an operational space. This is not a space where aircraft in any great size or quantity can operate in without being lit up, targeted, and destroyed. I just pulled up an article as Gunny was talking. Apparently, the Russians have lost 3 helicopters in Ukraine. And so that's kind of where I'm going with this. They're nice, they're good, but it's not going to affect the strategic outcome. Is the thrust of my point. Where we are going to see the strategic outcome is artillery, HIMARS, logistics, ammunition. That is where we're going to see it, because air power is not playing a significant role in this war due to the sophisticated nature of the Ukrainian air defenses. It simply is not a permissive environment to allow you the freedom to attack ground targets in the way that you need to attack them in a tactical sense.
Yeah, but that's the point. You talk about defense. Gurney and I are talking about offense. And there, the defensive close air support and fighter screen capacity of the Russian Air Force covering those areas which are to be contested, not the ones which are currently contested, but the ones which are to be contested, matters a great deal. It is of strategic importance to get rid of those fighter screens, those Sukhois, and their capacity. It couldn't be bigger. The fact that they took out the air defenses first in order to get closer to those aircraft and destroy them is absolutely essential. The defensive air capacity of the Russian armed forces has been degraded to a degree which I would never have foreseen. And I think Gurney is 100% right. This is one of the most strategic impact factors of the war in the Southern Theater.
I would just push back against this very gently by saying, to what effect? So let's rewind the clock just very briefly, if I could. Okay, and then I'll hop off the mic here. Let's rewind the clock to, say, April, right? I'm just going to, say April, May timeframe, right? Even at that point, the Russian Air Force was not making a strategic impact given the limited capacity of Ukrainian air defenses. It was not, and again, I emphasize, it was not making an impact on the battlefield, both operationally or tactically. It simply was not. That is a fact. Since then, air defenses of Ukraine have only gotten more integrated. They've only gotten more weapon systems. They've only gotten more radar. They've only gotten more Stingers. They've only gotten more capacity. So your ability to push that wall down is diminished by the sheer amount of air suppression defenses that you have. I respect your experience, Axel, when it comes to the use of aircraft. I'm not questioning your expertise. Where I'm pushing back is that even before Ukraine had the capacity that it does today, the Russian Air Force was still not playing a significant role on the battlefield because it was not operationally effective, both in terms of its tactics, its training, its munitions, and thereby my saying that you can put out a fighter screen, yes, but let's be clear, the enemy gets a vote. Russian air defenses have still shot down Ukrainian aircraft. Russian air defenses still have 300s and 400s. They still have some suppression to the fact that when we do see aircraft flying, and I can't emphasize this enough, when you're seeing aircraft doing map of the earth operations, which is what they're doing, they're flying about 100 feet, maybe 200 feet above the deck. In order for you to be effective at a tactical level, you need to gain elevation for your ordnance or for your guns to have an effect. When you gain elevation, you then lock on to S-400 radar and you get lit up like a Christmas tree. Then you have to bank out, up and around and down onto your target after that map of the earth drawing. And you're not seeing that in any quantity. And you didn't see that when this war started. I'm sorry, we just didn't. We saw Russian aircraft falling out of the sky like it was a plague in Egypt, right? They just were not affecting the battlefield. Even then, and I would say even less now.
Craig, do you think this might tie in to what Vincent Torre, our guest, was saying earlier on? I don't know if you heard it, but one of his points was that the latter part of the Soviet Union and now Russia has pursued an essentially asymmetric strategy towards air power. They've basically given up on air power. They have this fundamentally defeatist attitude where they know they can't compete with the United States and NATO on equal terms. And so their attitude towards towards technology in air power and doctrine in air power has been fundamentally defeatist.
I would agree with that to an extent, but only to the extent that the Russian Air Force was operationally effective to begin with. Because if we're thinking in terms of a Western thought process. The first thing you do in the West is you suppress all radar systems. You don't fly sorties. You're not doing anything except targeting radar systems for the first week or 2 weeks to clear the space, to push that line back so that you can have an effect on the battlefield with your air power, right? That's the whole idea. It is suppression, complete suppression of air defenses with everything you got, Tomahawks, anything that you have in the arsenal. I don't need to run through the list. The point is that they were not integrated at the tactical level with their army the way that the West is tactically integrated. The way that I see helicopters flying in Russia, the way that I see them flying as low as they're flying, for crying out loud, means that you cannot target, you cannot coordinate with ground forces because you need elevation. You can't be 100 feet off the deck and think that you're going to affect anything. You need elevation to target down, whether you're going to drop a gravity bomb or a laser guided bomb, because a bomb might need time to arm. If it's laser guarded, it doesn't arm right off the chute. There is somewhat of a delay there when it drops. And if you're going to go guns hot and just use your guns, you still need elevation, because it's just geometry, right? If you're going straight, you need somewhat of a slight incline for that gun to go down into the ground. You can only do that so long before you run out of air and you just hit the ground. So you need elevation as you tilt off that 90-degree angle, right? So think like a 90-degree angle. You need about a 100-degree angle, and then you need to be able to climb out of that once you finish your gun run. And so that's what I'm saying. So yes, to your point, let me just be succinct. It is wholly given up. The Russian Air Force has been ineffective since the start of this war.
Yeah, I mean, my point here is about symptoms and diseases at the strategic level, right? If the Soviet Union essentially gave up on parity in air power sometime in the late 70s and the early 80s because they knew it was a war they were not going to win, then that has symptoms, and those symptoms persist to this day. And is this the fruit of those symptoms that we're seeing?
I know we got a lot of hands up in Gurney's here, so I don't want to monopolize. But in short, I would agree with you to an extent, Tim.
Let me zoom back in for a second, because I can't. I don't know if I can adequately answer Tim's question. It sounds about right in some ways, but I don't know if I can bring anything to the table in terms of substance to sort of to prove that. But let me just focus in here, and let me Craig, let me remove some things where we clearly agree on, just to remove those, get those out of the way, to sort of to Dom's point here, to understand, is there a difference between is there really a difference between our opinions, or are they more similar than we think? I agree with you. The Russian Air Force is underperforming relative to expectations going into this. Completely agree with you there. And earlier on in this conflict, there were some decisive victories that Ukraine was able to pull off, specifically because of the underperformance of the Russian Air Force, especially to work with in a combined capacity with their ground forces. So we don't agree there. I also don't disagree with you. Anything that you're talking about, the methods or description of the attacks, I don't disagree with you on the fundamentals there. We're in agreement on what can make an attack effective, what can make it successful, and what that looks like. No disagreement there. I think the disagreement is really only on the conclusion drawn towards the end of this, right? And so when we talk about a status quo, and we talk about forces adapting to that, we did see the Russians, after underperforming heavily in the airspace, we did see them regain their ability to generate air sorties, and whether that had an effect, I don't want to get into that, because that we need verifiable information, and there's a lot of anecdotal information out there, and there's a lot of interviewees we've had that are talking different ways about the Russian air power, but they are and they have been able to change the status quo from their extreme underperformance to more of a status quo, and the Ukrainians have adapted as well. And so I think the disagreement just comes on the conclusion drawn, in terms of, just because there appears to be a current status quo, or it appears that the Russians, not appears, the Russians are not, to your point here, and we agree on this, the Russians are truly not able to, with repetition, successfully pull off attacks with their air power, especially attacks beyond the forward line of contact. We agree with that. Now, I think there are one-off events that we don't know about where they're able to do some limited things. But again, that's in a limited capacity. So to your point, we agree. The effect of the Russian air power on their offense is much more limited. But my only disagreement here is that regardless of what it looks like, these planning considerations have been important throughout the entire war, and they continue to be. In little tipping points, whether it was early on in Russia was able to successfully combine their air power, that could have been enough of a tipping point to change the balance of the war that would have been potentially unfavorable for Ukraine. And so in the current phase, what I believe is occurring is that Ukraine realizes, and to Axel's point here, Axel and I are in agreement on, for Ukraine to go on the offense and to go from this current period of where both sides, and I want to use parity very loosely here, we agree that there's not a symmetry here. Russia has more aircraft and more airfields than Ukraine does. There's not a symmetry in that. However, they've achieved sort of a pseudo parity and status quo, and that is through the network of air defenses, the effectiveness of the Ukrainians relative to the Russians, for a bunch of reasons. But nonetheless, while the outward effects right now are not as significant nearly as the artillery, if the Ukrainians are going to go on the offensive and are not going to meet the Russians head on attritionally because they don't have to, small tipping points and changing that equation there to allow Ukrainians to have more than parity, to allow the Ukrainians to generate combat close air support for themselves, and to allow the Ukrainians to nullify and mitigate the ability of Russians to protect defensively when Ukrainians push through Russian lines. That is significant to me, and that's a significant planning consideration. And I think the balance of this war will hinge on events such as that, because of the extreme capability of air power. If somebody can sort of get past a stalemate, and I don't believe it's a perfect stalemate that's occurring, but if the Ukrainians can achieve a tipping point, if they can continue, if they have enough AGMs, if they have enough airframes, if they have enough opportunities to continue suppressing air defenses and neutralizing airfields and combat sorties in Russia's ability to regenerate, pilots and aircraft, that will become huge to allow the Ukrainians to go on the offensive. I think that's the only disagreement. And to sum it up, I think it's because the effects are not as destructive in this phase, nor is visible, doesn't change the fact in my mind that it is one of the biggest considerations. And at any given day, just hypothetically, at any given day, if either side were to change that current equation, it would make huge and extreme changes on the battlefield. But I'll end there.
Axel, are we happy with that? Should we put a pin in it here?
No, completely. No, from my point of view, Gurney put it very, very perfectly. I still remain convinced that strategic air power matters a great deal, and destroying that defensive close air support capacity was absolutely vital for the offensive, which we're going to see, or the offensives we're going to see. And we're going to see more of that destruction of air power of Russian make.
Excellent. So more harms delivered to Russian radar installations.
Gag.
Yes, quite. Right. Thank you. Thank you, Axel, Gurney, Craig. Where's Craig? Thank you for that enlightening conversation. And I think we should go on to Brad.
Could I thank Craig? Could I thank Craig real quick here for allowing us all the opportunity to sort of speak from our differing opinions here to subjects, sort of for not only for our own benefit, but maybe if it's interesting to the audience to just consider these. So Craig dropped off there, but I wanted to give him a shout and a thank you.
Which is, by the way, Gurney, why I incited both Craig and you to come up and discuss it out in the open, because I think it's one of the more valuable discussions we could have. And in that regard, what happened to John Howard? I was just about to bring him in. Jesus bloody Christ. Tim, you lost an Englishman.
Oh dear, not another one.
Well, then you have to deal with the rest of them. There's Brad, there's Tom, there's Nina from Finland, and Craig is amongst the listeners. So Craig is coming back.
Yeah, sorry about that. I hadn't had a call for about an hour, and then as soon as I try to get on the space, I get 3 in the space of 5 minutes. So the phone ghosts were raised. The spirits were raised.
All right, Craig, I was just praising the fact that we are having this discussion because I think it's absolutely valuable that we do this, even if you're wrong.
I can't emphasize how wrong everybody else is and how I'm right. If the Russian Air Force or any Air Force was going to play a role in this war, then it would have happened before everybody's air defenses and everything was pushed to the front, Russia included, and they just simply have not happened. And we haven't seen it, and in my opinion, we're not going to see it have an outsized effect on any operations whatsoever. Yes, there will be some tactical advantages. There will be targets of opportunity. There will be things like that. But to say that it's going to affect the battlefield or going to affect anything really, I think is a misnomer and a non sequitur.
That's much appreciated. We are only talking about, and you're completely, absolutely correct, they haven't played a role at all because they cannot do combined arms well. They don't have enough training for, say, attacks and supporting attacks. But what the Ukrainians, and I think both Gurney and I would have been worried about, is their defensive close air support capacity, which fortunately has been neutralized now. But then again, that's my view. I'll stick to it.
Yeah, and Craig, when you weren't here, I was just thanking you for the comment, because when we disagree up here with dissenting or differing views, I think it serves the audience and serves us well to sort of work through the issues there. So thanks.
Oh, absolutely, 100% agree.
Actually, you said you wanted Tom Howard. I wanted Tom Howard to put a pin in it.
Well, thank you. I'm not an air expert at all, but I think where I disagree with Craig is that I think he's looking at this through the wrong end of the telescope, and it's not necessarily about Russia's ground attack capacity. It's about clearing out their capacity to interdict and interfere with Ukrainian air operations once they go on the offensive. Because if you think about the way the Ukrainians are operating now, they're very much trying to adopt NATO doctrine. They are light on armour, and as a result, anything they can bring to bear in terms of rotary and ground attack will be very important to them. And I think as a result, what they're trying to do, or as I said, is clear out Russia's ability to interfere with them. Because, I mean, this is a positional war at the moment. So there are fixed air defence sites and stuff, and there's an AD bubble effectively over large areas of the front. If that front becomes more fluid, then actually that AD bubble will start to break down, and there'll be much more opportunities for daredevil low-flying helicopter pilots to get in amongst the Russians and cause a bit of havoc. Really, I think that's where they're going. And the other aspect, potentially, is if it gets into a more fluid battle and the Russians are struggling, then the Black Sea Fleet is going to be ordered, effectively, to start contributing, particularly with cruise missile attacks. That brings them within range then of the Ukrainian Air Force, and if they lack air cover, they're even more vulnerable. So I mean, there are lots of good reasons for trying to thin out as far as possible Russia's air-to-air capacity.
If I could just briefly touch on that in terms of Ukraine's capacity for air, and I can't emphasize this enough. So long as you're flying that low to the deck, your ability for your aircraft to have an influence dramatically decreases exponentially. You need elevation in order for aircraft to operate. So if you're at, say, 5,000 MSL, right, you're nowhere near flight levels, but you're at 5,000 MSL, right? You are, from what I can see and everything I understand and trying to kind of engross myself into this subject, there is air denial at that altitude. You cannot operate in loitering or tactical combinations, because in order to attack ground targets, you need to loiter. You can't just, go 500 knots at 1,000 feet and expect you're going to hit anything. You need to loiter, target acquisition. You need time for your ground units to paint. You need time to coordinate. We don't need to go into JTAC and how that stuff works. I would just simply say that for Ukraine to have an effective air power addition to their armed forces, to their combined arms, you need to destroy Russian radar systems that will acquire these targets. The dogfighting and what we see, in my opinion, has less of an effect rather than if you have multiple.
Craig's dropped, hasn't he?
Has he gone? Yeah, he's dropped down.
He'll be back.
All right. Well, just I don't know if you can still hear me, Craig. I see you still on as a listener. Yeah, and that's a fair one.
Go ahead. Sorry.
Are you back? You back?
Yeah, no, go.
Brilliant.
Yeah,
thank you.
Go ahead.
Yeah, and thank you. I mean, from what I understand, following this, an awful lot of helicopters have been shipped to Ukraine. I think a dozen officially have gone from the US. There's probably a lot more. I think a good number have gone from Eastern Europe, who are operating Soviet-era airframes. I would imagine they are all being tooled up Mad Max style as much as they possibly can. Those guys are not going to be flying around at medium altitude. They're going to be flying nap of the Earth. And if they're flying ground support missions, they would be really vulnerable to Russian MiGs. But if those, or Sukhois or whatever, but if they're not there, then it's one less threat to them to deal with. And as I say, once you get a mobile front and it gets fluid on the ground, the air defense bubble that's provided by surface-to-air missiles is going to break down. And of course, they are going to continue targeting Russian radar sites. I mean, that's what all these harms are for, isn't it? But I think it's one part.
But that's my point, is that the air saturation is that you can have, you're absolutely correct. You the way you pointed the use of low-flying helicopters is spot on. I have no disagreement. But where I would push back is the limit to which these Russian aircraft can operate, given the density and the saturation of Ukrainian air defenses, that even if they were trying to fly, even if they were trying to cut these helicopters out of the air, they can't even get the altitude needed to do that, because Ukrainian air defenses are just so saturated at this point. There's been over 1,000 anti-air missiles delivered. There's been 39 radar systems delivered. There's been Stingers beyond, you can't even count how many Stingers have probably arrived in Ukraine at this point. I mean, you can, but my point is that so think of it like this. Low-flying helicopters, right? You say they respond with aircraft, but those aircraft can't fly because of the density of the aerial denial that Ukraine has put up. So as it moves forward, those Russian aircraft can't even try to get those helos that are flying at a tactical, you're 100% correct. They can't even do that because the saturation of air defenses is just so broad and so thick that you can try, but I mean, you're not going to really do a whole lot.
Oh, okay, and I take your point, Craig, but I would just say that if you were going into an offensive upon which potentially hinged the recovery of 20% of your country, you would over rather than under insure and do everything you could to make sure that you weren't going into a fair or anything like a fair fight.
Absolutely. I agree with you 100% on that. I'm simply arguing the effectiveness to which air power will play going forward. I'm not saying that so let me clarify. I'm not saying, for those that are listening, that Axel, Gurney, or you are incorrect. I'm not saying that. Where I'm arguing is that air power is not going to have the effect that people think it's going to play, and not because of any other reason, but based on the sheer number of anti-aircraft sites, whether they're guns, missiles, whatever you call it, right? Stingers. It's just not going to play the decisive role in this war. It will play a role. Do not get me wrong. There will be a role for it, but it's not going to be decisive because of the sheer amount of air defenses that both Russia and Ukraine have established in certain parts of the country. Not all of it, but the Donbass, yes. Melitopol, yes. Zaporizhia, yes. That is you do not want to fly in that area, whether you're Ukrainian or a Russian. You just don't want to fly. It's suicide. Did I drop again?
No, you're good.
Oh, okay.
I'm just waiting if there's any more on airplanes.
No, not from me, thanks. I think we've drawn the teeth out of this one now. Cheers, Craig.
Yeah, to you as well, my friend. Thank you.
Craig, real quick. Sorry, everyone, but I've been hoping for Craig the whole day. Did you see the news of 2.8 million tons of grain having been shipped out through alternative routes, not through maritime ports, in the month of July alone?
I did, and when I saw that, the first thing that sprung to mind is how can we double that? Because we need money to get into Ukraine as quickly as possible. So while that should be applauded, and that is absolutely a fantastic number to be in July.
Great, we don't need to double that. The average exports last year were 4 million tons a month. This was 2.8 million just through Danube and Romania.
So with respect, I would say we need to double that, not because of
the backlog.
Yes, for the backlog, yes, but I say we need to double it because that was at a time where Ukraine's economy was somewhat diversified and it had.
Упродовж 2020-2021 років учасники оборудки безпідставно видали понад 700 які одержали мільйонні прибутки. За матеріалами СБУ накладено арешт на банківські рахунки.
It's probably a phone call again.
No, this wasn't a phone call. Phone call has
I just dropped. I'm gonna step down the listener here in just a second. I would say we need to double that only because at that time the Ukrainian economy was diversified. It had alternative sources of revenue. They don't have that. We have a lot of bond payments coming up for the Ukrainian government that a lot of private investors are trying to kind of find ways around, trying to delay these interest and coupon payments, trying to kind of find a way around it. So I'm not saying we need to double it just because I want to double it. I want to double it because we need to get as much money into Ukraine through revenue generating sources than we are now. That's my only reason, nothing else. But it's a fantastic number.
The thing to highlight, however, is it puts to lie anyone who says that Ukraine should give up because it's harming some countries in Africa or the Middle East who can't get enough food, simply because, as much as there was being shipped out last year on a monthly basis is now being shipped out this year anyway. And also, it means that the Damocles sword of that Istanbul initiative is no more, which is also fantastic news. With that, I think that's the perfect transition to Brad.
Okay, just to tidy up on some of this air stuff. One thing, Craig, that I think you're completely missing is that it's not so much that the Russian sorry, it's early. That the Russian air forces are effective. It's that the mere fact that they exist and that they represent a threat is strategically useful, right? And it prevents Ukraine from operating with impunity should they take out enough of Russia's air defenses. So beyond that, the other thing that I'd say is part of the reason why they are ineffective in combined force operations is the nature of the Russian command structure, and it's too slow. It's not ground up, it's top down. By the time somebody gets an approval for a strike, it's too late. The battlefield has moved on, and Axel is going to enjoy this. Is going to nerd out over this next thing. There's actually a paper, 1945, Friedrich Hayek. I'm going to read a little passage. The name of the paper is The Use of Knowledge in Society. And here, there's a paragraph here that I'm going to read. the peculiar character of the problem of a rational economic order is determined precisely by the fact that the knowledge of the circumstances of which we must make use never exists in concentrated or integrated form, but solely as the dispersed bits of incomplete and frequently contradictory knowledge which all the separate individuals possess. The economic problem of society is thus not merely a problem of how to allocate given resources, if given is taken to mean given to a single mind which deliberately solves the problem set by these data. It is rather a problem of how to secure the best use of resources known to any of the members of society for ends whose relative importance only these individuals know, or to put it briefly, it is a problem of the utilization of knowledge which is not given to anyone in its totality. So basically what all of this is trying to say is that to assume that a commander is going to have all the information that they need to make top-down decisions in a complex battlefield environment is, an exercise in utter futility. And this is why distributed power structures and some of the approaches that we use here in the West and that Ukraine uses fairly effectively as well, where teams and battlefield commanders are given more autonomy, is more effective, and it creates tactical advantages in terms of speed of the delivery of, quote, services, unquote, on the battlefield. So finally, one last thing. I just remind everybody that today's Miria Report is brought to you by Atakham's Cigarettes, the lucky strike of Russia. And I've put an ad for Atakham's Cigarettes, not to be confused with ATACMS missile systems provided by the West, completely different. But I have posted a video ad for Atakham's Cigarettes, the lucky strike of Russia, in the nest. And just remember to please smoke responsibly. Thank you.
I'm happy to let Gurney or Tom go, and then I can respond to Brad. I don't want to monopolize anything.
Oh, where did Axel go? Okay, let's. In this case, Tom, do you want to talk about air power?
Yeah, it was a brief one. I just wanted to back up Craig a little bit because I felt like both sides were making some good points. Clearly the Russian Air Force has been really ineffective since the start. But suppose this scenario. Suppose that the Ukrainians use their HARMS radar-seeking missiles and they take out every single Russian air radar, every single S-300 site, every single S-400 site, and every single Russian aircraft. Just imagine a situation of complete air superiority for Ukraine. Zero Russian Air Force, zero Russian air defences. I still don't think the Ukrainians have got quite enough aircraft to get an absolutely massive, decisive advantage. I think that would be really, really good. I think it'd be really helpful. I still think they should do it. But I still think it's going to come down to, the artillery, the HIMARS, the men on the ground, the armoured vehicles, the tanks. I just simply don't think the Ukrainians have got enough air force to have a decisive victory based purely on air superiority. So it's not so much about the ineffectiveness of the Russian Air Force, but just that even if there was zero Russian Air Force and air defences, don't think the Ukrainians have got enough planes to make a difference. And Craig's waving his hand. I don't know if he just meant to clap then or if he was going, me. Gurney, do you want to go ahead?
Sure. I'll go very quick with this. I was going to mention something different, so I'll put my hand right back up after this. Tom, to your point there, if the Russians were able to muster motivated, equipped, and trained infantry in numbers larger than their artillery to support their artillery, I would say you might have a bit of a point there. But I would disagree, and I would say if the Ukrainians aren't as scared of the air power when they're pushing through, and they can effectively coalesce and bring their forces together, but not long enough to be targeted by artillery, right? There's a time difference there. That the Ukrainians are going to push their numbers, that they're going to organize themselves into larger units, and they're going to thrust into the Ukrainian artillery, enclose with the Ukrainian artillery to not only nullify, to make the artillery ineffective of the Russians, but because there's less Russian infantry to counter that the Ukrainians basically insert, enclose, and hug the artillery, and that's simultaneously nullifying the Russian artillery advantage, right? It's essentially rolling over them. It's not, but I mean, it's no longer an attritional meat grinder, artillery on artillery, inch by inch, trench by trench, right? And the Ukrainians don't want to mass forces like that, one, because of artillery, but two, mainly, if they mass artillery on the offensive and start closing with artillery, they're wide open to Russian combat sorties. So I would say I actually think it would be much different if Russia had no air power. Just the way their BTGs are designed right now, I believe the Ukrainians could effectively, even if they don't have all the armored vehicles at the moment they want, that the Ukrainians could and would close with Russian artillery positions, effectively insert themselves there, and whether there's remaining Russian infantry forces in that mix, I mean, that means the Russians are going to have to start shelling themselves and the Ukrainians, and the Ukrainians will continue to hug and push those forces. I mean, essentially leapfrogging past, the minefields. I mean, I assume that's what the case would be, that they would also push engineering assets forward so that they could penetrate through minefields. And once Ukrainians have avenues open, that they would just flood it with troops and hug the artillery and essentially leapfrog each stage, which is what they cannot do now. But anyways, I'll put my hand back up.
Yeah, if I could just very briefly just touch on that, and I do have to go, so I don't want to leave anybody hanging here or seem disrespectful to the arguments that were made on both sides of this. I would just simply say that, Tom, you're slightly incorrect in the idea that if this was a much larger war in terms of manpower, right? If this was World War II scale type of manpower, then the numbers would matter. But a number of Russian fighting forces in the Donbass alone mean that you don't need a theater-wide operation or a huge swath of area to clean out. You just need to carve a path. So if you're in that instance and I snap my finger and all air defenses and everything is gone, all you would do is just concentrate that air power where you want to go. You don't need to do it across the entire battlefield. You just use it to loiter and to cover and to clear the path, if you will, quite literally plow the road in front of you and use that in a tactical, coordinated fashion, combined arms, classic stuff, where Ukrainians could just, again, give me 20 attack helicopters and 40 Su-25s, and you could, with no air defenses at all, and this war would be as good as won. Because you don't need mass World War II-like type of operations. You need concentrated operations of no more to 20 to 25,000 troops, given the amount of firepower that modern warfare has. Give me 25,000 troops and complete air superiority, and the war is pretty much over at that point. Because, again, you don't need to advance across a broad front. You just need to concentrate, right, where the enemy is not, and then drive through that hole and then just carve and plow the road with aircraft. I would just simply end on this. These targets of Russian airfields in and around Crimea all made us happy. They all made us, ecstatic, right? We all love to see these things go up in smoke, right? Whether it's HIMARS or sabotage or special forces or whatever, right? We all love to see it. But I just have to remind everybody that even when they had somewhat of, freedom of movement, if you will, a little bit more breath, right? They can kind of breathe a little bit more than they can now. They were still having next to no impact on the battlefield. Hardly any impact at all. The Ukrainians were still able to hold Sumy, Chernihiv, Kharkiv. They were still able to do this because Russian air power just it's a paper tiger. It's toothless. And even around that area where you would think that you're, 40 miles from the Russian border, 60, 100 miles from the Russian border, right? You can be there in the blink of an eye in a modern day fighter jet, right? But it's that critical window where Russia had the opportunity to affect operations on the ground, and they still couldn't do it. they were still losing ground. They couldn't complete the encirclement of Kharkiv. Ukraine was able to actually put together a solid combined arms attack and liberate Kharkiv, right? That was a concentrated attack around Kharkiv. That was not a bunch of guys running around with RPGs on their shoulder. That was a formal, conventional style of an attack. And that was a perfect target for Russian aircraft, and they still couldn't do anything about it. So if they couldn't do anything about it then, what's that say that they could do anything now, right? Given the sheer amount of anti-aircraft radar systems, missile systems, guns, stingers, the list just goes on and on and on. If they couldn't do it then, they're not going to do it now. And they're going to have even less of an impact as they move forward. So, well, yes, we all want to see Russian stuff go boom. We all want to see Russians, end up in boxes sent back to their mothers. We all want to see that, right? But we're kind of getting excited about these aircraft going boom and not focusing on, well, what impact were they already having? And the answer is they were having zero impact in the operational outcome. At the closing stages of World War II, the Germans were flying jet fighters, and they were still flying in and around Allied formations, right? They were still German aircraft aloft in the closing days of World War II, but they weren't having an impact on the overall accomplishment of what the goal was. And if you can't stop your enemy from doing something, then there's a word for that. It's called losing, right? And if you're losing, it doesn't matter how many you got aloft. It doesn't matter if you're flying or not. It matters the impact you have when you do fly. And so I think it's helpful to remind ourselves that if Russia couldn't do it then, they can do it less now. And they're going to do it less now, even more so because they couldn't attack anything because all their experienced pilots are dead or in a POW camp somewhere in Western Ukraine. So I think it's important we contextualize this a little bit. Russian stuff going boom, yes. But does it have an impact on the overall outcome? I'm sorry, it does not. These were static, easy targets that are not going to go anywhere. These planes are not going to go anywhere. They're fixed. They're not going to move. Their ordnance isn't going to move. Their fuel's not going to move. These were easy targets to pick off. Let's not conflate this. Is it good that 2 or 3 more sorties a day won't be flying? Of course it is. Yes, absolutely. I completely agree with that. It does help Ukraine. I'm not trying to take away from that. But does that change the direction of the way this war is going? I'm sorry, but it does not. It doesn't change it, because if Russia couldn't do it then, it can't do it now, at all.
Brittany?
Well, I wasn't going to... Craig and I disagree. I was going to go to a different one, so I'll pause and wait, because I don't have a response.
Yeah, no, wait around.
In which case, Chris, I guess.
I apologize in advance if this is being covered. Simple question. I've just been in and out of my car, so kind of coming in and out of the conversation. But these radar systems, they give off the signal, or is it something that has to be visually spotted before they can be
when they're on,
preyed upon?
They emanate radio waves, lots of them. It's in radio wave terms, it's the same kind of thing as you would have if you had a bonfire for heat. So they emanate a lot of energy. This is what radar-seeking missiles, like the HARM, kind of homes in for.
Yeah, and I got to run. Brad, did you want to counter anything? I want to pay you the respect of listening to what you had to say.
I did, actually. So the other thing Craig, by the way, I appreciate your points. At a tactical, just in terms of military standpoint, I think you've got some great points. But one thing that you are missing is that how much of this war is psychological in nature? How much of it is propaganda based? How much of it is morale based? What was the value of sinking the Moskva, right? What's the value of certainly hitting these ammo dumps, has value in that we're eliminating, arms, but it has an even bigger value in demoralizing the Russian forces. And, Russian air power is one of the things that, the Russian military and Putin take a lot of pride in. and seeing an airbase go up, losing 9 or 10 of their sophisticated aircraft, or some of their most sophisticated fighters getting shot down in the field, that is a blow to their morale. It's a black eye. And so
if I could just very briefly interrupt you, because I do have to jump, but I just want to emphasize this one point. And I think that we're getting, when we talk about morale, it is such an intangible part of warfare. You can't put your finger on it. You can't touch it. You can't pick it up and carry it somewhere, right? I would agree with you that the sinking of the Moskva was an enormous propaganda coup. But here's where I would counter that. It was a propaganda boost for the Ukrainians that's intangible. But let's remember that even after the Moskva was sunk, Russia was still carrying out large-scale offensive operations in the Donbass, and they're even closer to Sloviansk and Bakhmut than they were before, and they're still conducting offensive operations in the Donbass, right? I get what you're saying, but I don't think that it took away from the Russians more than it gave to the Ukrainians, right? Because the average Russian soldier at this point is only there because he's being told to be there or he's going to be shot by Wagner, right? Whether the Moskva is sunk or not. And so we have to remember that when we see propaganda, it goes both ways. I would argue that the sinking of the Moskva was an overwhelming morale, and I would just very briefly say a military victory that is almost impossible to quantify from an intangible point of view. But where I would say is that it didn't have as much of an effect on the Russians that you might think, because even after that was done, they were still conducting large-scale offensive operations, and they were still taking Ukrainian cities. So it didn't like...
This is different, though, because we have a whole bunch of Russian civilians that are seeing things get blown up in their neighborhoods, right? And so tactically, it makes all kinds of sense to do this stuff in Crimea because we're trying to sow chaos, right? Fear and chaos. And there's a lot of really interesting disinformation campaigns that the Ukrainians are launching. And so our goal right now is to destabilize Crimea, and take as many Russian prisoners as possible, take back Kherson, but to the extent we can sow fear and doubt in the Russian civilian population, which then is going to flee over a bridge and carry that fear and doubt with them because they had to cut their vacations short, and now they're telling all their friends about all these huge explosions that were happening nearby that they could see from their beach villas. That's a thing. And so
I'm going to jump in there,
agree.
I'm going to jump in there. Yeah, I'm going to have to disagree with my good friend Craig. Where'd he go? Disagree wholeheartedly. The morale is a factor that we look at when we do our estimates in a military planning perspective, and we can't really, reasonably the effect of it is as Craig was saying, they were still taking cities, but they weren't taking what they should be taking. They weren't working the way they should be working. They weren't conducting maneuver warfare in a tactical bound in 20, 30, 40 kilometers. They had a great concentrated in one area. The Ukrainians have their military spread out over their entire country to protect it from possible Russian attack from somewhere else. With respect to the sinking of the Moskva, the after action report will show that it absolutely degraded Russian capabilities, especially naval capabilities, signal intelligence communications from the Black Sea Fleet demonstrate almost complete and total mutinies where captains would sail out and then say, I'm not going over there. I'll launch this from over here and then I will go back. And they'd say, I'm not being responsible for this ship getting sunk. That's something that will come out in the mix later on. Some of our good friends in the Navy have been convinced that
Oh.
Yeah, I don't know if it's just me, but is Yehuda's audio cutting in and out?
I think it's gone.
Yehuda, if you can hear us, your audio is intermittent for maybe 20 seconds at a time. Okay, just saying it again, just so we don't have dead air here. Yehuda, we can't hear your audio, but if anyone's on the host account, if you could go ahead and push Yehuda down just so he knows. I don't think I could, as a co-host, push him down. Okay, we're just getting Yehuda and Axel back up here.
Yeah, where did you lose me?
After mutinies on the Black Sea.
Oh, jeez Louise. The first time I mentioned it?
Now you got me, unsure.
Okay. Well, at any rate, there were the Russian captains going out to sea were refusing direct orders. Signal intelligence communication demonstrates that they were literally not going to where they were told to go to because they said they were going to get, they were afraid they'd get sunk, and they will fire their missiles from here or there or somewhere else. That's recorded. So we can't underestimate the effects of the Moskva sinking, certainly on the Black Sea fleet's capabilities. Axel? Okay. So, having said that, sorry, I don't know if your mic's hot, Axel, I just muted it. So there are really serious ramifications to really bad and poor morale. The Russians should have been advancing 20, 30 kilometers a day minimum in Donbass. They were going 500 meters, 0 meters, 1,000 meters, and they're paying for it in liters of blood. So morale, big factor. It is. You can assess it. It's not the easiest thing to consider and to make deductions from, but it certainly is playing out. So we can say that with all the force that the Russians have, and their concentrated force in a very small area in Donbass, so it's very hard to judge the effect of morale because you're seeing them make advances. If they had great morale, maybe you would argue that they'd be doing 100 times better, and they clearly aren't doing very well. So I just wanted to point that out about morale to Brad. And then I said lastly, I wouldn't use the terminology as in sowing fear and chaos. I'm not sure that's the key. The key is it's not us doing it, first of all, it's the Ukrainians. And what they're doing is not, if fear and chaos come as a result, that's fine. But really what they're demonstrating to the Russians is that we can reach out and touch you. You're not invincible. You're not a megalith that's going to stand and destroy us. That's more important. So it's almost like a battered wife with a crazy husband who's abusive, and he also tells her they have lots of money, and one day she goes to the bank and she finds that she has no money. She's confused. That's the feeling the Russians are getting in Crimea. They're like, wait a minute, we've been told we're the strongest country in the world. How are these Ukrainians blowing up stuff all over us? That in itself will cause fear and panic. But the real goal is to destroy Russian capabilities. Secondary effect is to make the Russians realize their leaders have been lying to them. And that's super important. Thanks. Sorry for the long-winded answer. I just wanted to jump in to talk about morale. And Brad, if you wanted to follow up, if not, we'll go to Rosalie. Bradley. Okay.
Oh, Rosalie's great.
Go ahead, Rosalie.
Okay. I wanted to just comment on the potential impact of the loss of aircraft and these repeated strikes in Crimea. And even now in the Russian information operations channels and in the domestic facing news channels, the Kremlin is trying to build up the military as something to be proud of. And this is the way they're doing it, it tells me right now it's a message they really want to reach the Russian public. So in the past several days, I've seen headlines like special operation in Ukraine boosts interest in Russian weapons, according to defense official. That's from TASS. And people seem to have been unsettled by the initial strike in Crimea. And since then, there have been messages also from, the different information ops groups that they have, urging people to remain calm. They draw parallels. I'll try to find the text. I don't have it now, but there was a very strange one that was drawing a parallel to the Soviet Union and how they needed to have faith in the state. It was really weird. It really made me think that people are very unsettled. And so I think it is an important impact. And I mean, it's like Yehuda said, obviously I don't have experience in military apart from studying the psychological effect. But it can make or break, any battle. It really does. So that's all I wanted to add.
Yeah, and I would just caveat, the Russians have always been promoting, the Kremlin has always promoted the army as one of the greatest institutions in Russia. And it's not a recent thing. They're stepping it up, obviously. Ironically, when it comes to Russian military sales of equipment, aside from India and certain countries that are trying to scoop up stuff, Turkey, which had been buying the S-400s, have actually rejected any claims that they're purchasing more. They realize they're junk because they see them in action. They've been told by the
Is it doing that audio cutout for you again?
He cut out.
Yeah, he's cut out.
Sorry.
Yeah,
my bad. So what I wanted to say was, I just got a call on the other line. Sorry about that weird, there's a pesky little kid who keeps coming in and swearing and saying the N-word or F off. I apologize for that. I thought I was trying to give people a chance to come to speak. So my apologies. As I was saying about the Russians, that even, they've been telling the Turks that the S-400 is a really powerful weapon that can destroy jets. And when they don't see them working in Syria, they tell the Turks that really, they've made a deal with the Israelis not to attack them, and now the Turks are seeing that that's obviously probably not true. So they're not buying anymore, but the Russians are saying they are selling them. So this goes to the the old Soviet Russian create your own reality thing by lying, and they don't really care. So we're going to see more and more of that. Thanks, Rosalie. Let's go, Sojo Leonard Dryfly. Go ahead, Sojo. Sojo?
She usually has to switch the headset real quick. Yeah, go ahead.
Does she? Sorry. Thank you so much, Yehuda and Gurney. I came up very quickly to agree with you wholeheartedly, Yehuda. I just had to push back a little bit on your battered housewife comment. Like suddenly she is aware of that she's battered when she goes to the bank and realizes all her money's gone.
That's not what I said. Not the battered part. She realizes.
Oh, okay.
I said that she's a battered wife who in addition, the husband says that they're rich. So it's like the Russian government. They treat their citizens like garbage. But one of the payoffs is we're really powerful, and then they find out that payoff is actually not there. That's what I was referring to.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. But going back to like the air power and the blowing up of airplanes and things not meaning anything. Actually, I kind of have to disagree with the fact that it doesn't actually mean anything, because you can't look at the war, Craig.
Oh.
Yeah, you can't look at the war sort of like statistically like that. You need to sort of like get in the right pair of shoes and look at it from the Russian perspective. And as you said, it's a big morale downer that they're having their air power decimated like that. And I think actually it means a lot. It might not do numbers wise, but it actually does mean a lot. And I will be quiet now.
And I'll just quickly fill in the blank real quick to bring Yehuda up to speed, or anyone just tuning in here. So anyone just tuning in here, we had a sort of lively discussion, debate with Craig and Axel and myself and some others. And so if you're just tuning in here, or someone references a comment from earlier, just know that we had sort of done a segment on that regarding air power in Ukraine and the effects of that. And that's exactly where some of these questions are coming from or referencing.
I might have read some of that in the Signal channel. Yeah, let me say this. So, in our method of understanding air control, we have 4 levels. You have unfavorable, which is exactly how it sounds, unfavorable. You have air parity, which is kind of like you're both the same. You almost have the same opportunities, and you have the same limitations and constraints. Then you have air superiority, which means that you have the qualitative edge, and you have air supremacy, which means you dominate the skies. So an example of air supremacy would be the United States of America and Iraq, United States of America and Afghanistan. Complete air supremacy, or air supremacy, which infers completeness. So when this war kicked off, there was a very strong expectation by everyone, and everyone in the zoo expected, without exception, the Russians would maintain and achieve air supremacy right off the get-go. The number of fixed-wing fighter jets, bombers, helicopters, air defense platforms. The belief is that the Russians would be absolutely untouchable. Now, fast forward a few months, that equation went to literally air parity. And that's an own goal, as they say in Europe. You score on yourself. Because it was the Russians who were not deploying their air at all. There were comments that they have only 5, Gen 5 or high-end aircraft platforms. I don't know. I'm not in the Air Force. But I'll say this. That in itself, which is a major, major part of this war, how this modern war should play out, is absolutely unheard of. It's shocking. It's like showing up to the doctor and seeing a child who's finished grade 10 science, and he's like, okay, mitochondria, meiosis, mitosis, let's do this. And you're like, no. That's how little it makes sense. So with respect to, but the Russians are still attacked. Of course they are, because they have thousands of aircraft. And if you noticed by their posture and how they